Act 6. Chapter 1. Spring arrived in Kyoto for the third time since Issei's first desperate night beside the fountain, the cherry blossoms unfolding once more along the old capital's streets, and with the season's gentle return came a disturbance that none of the household had anticipated after 2 years of steadily growing peace. It began with a message intercepted by one of Yasaka's border scouts, carried not by any official herald or formal envoy, but by a lone devil bounty hunter moving quietly along Kyoto's southern edge, making careful, deliberate inquiries about a stray nekisha wanted, according to old records he carried, for the murder of her former master. Yasaka delivered the news personally, her expression carrying a gravity that immediately drew the household's full attention as they gathered in the main room. A bounty hunter has been asking after Kuroka specifically, she said. He carries old underworld documentation, a warrant issued shortly after her departure from her previous devil house, naming her responsible for her master's death and marking her as a rogue to be captured or eliminated on sight. Kuroka's expression, which had carried easy, contented warmth only moments before, went suddenly and completely still, the color draining slightly from her face as old, carefully buried memories visibly surfaced behind her sharp eyes. I thought that warrant would have expired by now, she said quietly. It's been years. I didn't think anyone was still actively hunting it down. Rossweisse, watching her with immediate, careful concern, moved closer. Warrants of that nature do not typically expire on their own, she said gently. Particularly not ones involving the death of a devil of significant house standing. Someone would need to formally withdraw it, or provide sufficient evidence to overturn the original judgment. Issei, feeling the same protective instinct that had carried him through every previous trial the household had faced together, studied Kuroka's carefully guarded expression with quiet concern. You've never told us the full story, he said, not as an accusation, but as a gentle observation. What actually happened, Kuroka? I don't think any of us ever needed to know before now, but if someone's hunting you over it, I think it might matter. Kuroka was quiet for a long moment, her tail curling tightly around herself in a gesture Issei recognized from the earliest days of her arrival, the same defensive, guarded posture she had carried before she had ever learned to trust the household fully. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a rawness none of them had heard from her in nearly 2 years. My master was cruel, she said. Not just strict, not just demanding, genuinely cruel, in ways I don't particularly want to describe in detail. My little sister was part of his household staff as well, still young, still vulnerable to exactly the kind of treatment he specialized in. The night he finally crossed the line I couldn't allow, when he turned that cruelty directly on her, something in me broke, and my senjutsu abilities slipped entirely out of my control. I don't remember all of it clearly. I remember protecting her. I remember he didn't survive what happened next. The room fell into heavy, sympathetic silence, Yasaka's ancient eyes carrying deep, understanding sorrow, Rossweisse's expression carrying the particular, aching recognition of someone who had also once served under authority that valued control over genuine care. I ran, Kuroka continued. Took my sister somewhere I thought would be safer, then had to leave her behind too when the devils came looking, hoping she wouldn't be blamed for what I'd done. I've spent every year since running from exactly this moment, honestly. I just didn't expect it to finally catch up to me somewhere I actually consider home. Issei felt something fierce and protective settle deep into his chest, the same steady resolve that had carried him through every previous confrontation the household had faced. You're not running anymore, he said firmly. Whatever this hunter thinks he's owed, whatever old warrant he's carrying, he's going to find out exactly what kind of home he just walked into. Yasaka, who had remained quiet through much of Kuroka's difficult account, finally spoke, her ancient voice carrying the same steady, protective resolve she had shown from the very night she first found Issei bleeding beside the fountain. This household has faced coalitions, ancient trials, and formal institutions far more imposing than a single bounty hunter carrying an outdated warrant, she said. Whatever this man believes he is owed, he will find that Kyoto does not surrender its own to old injustices left uncorrected. We will help you clear this properly, Kuroka, through whatever means the situation actually requires. Rossweisse, her own careful mind already turning toward practical strategy, added her measured assessment. A warrant of this nature, issued by a devil house, cannot simply be ignored or defended against through force alone, she said. Doing so would only reinforce the accusation rather than resolve it. If we wish to see you truly free of this, rather than merely hidden from it, we will need to address it through proper channels, gathering evidence, seeking testimony, working toward having the original judgment formally reconsidered. Kuroka absorbed their combined resolve with visible, overwhelmed gratitude, the careful composure she had maintained through the difficult retelling finally giving way to something rawer and more vulnerable. I didn't expect any of you to take this on so completely, she admitted. I think some part of me was braced for you to need time to decide whether this was worth getting involved in. There was never a decision to make, Issei said simply. Your family. Whatever's chasing you is chasing all of us now, whether it realizes that yet or not. Chapter 2. The household gathered late into the evening, the earlier shock of the bounty hunter's arrival settling into careful, determined planning as Kuroka, still visibly shaken but steadied by the quiet, unwavering support surrounding her, filled in the remaining details of a story she had carried alone for far too many years. My sister's name is Chiron, she said, staring into her cooling tea with distant, careful focus. Though I've heard she goes by Kaneko now, a name given to her by whatever devil house took her in after everything happened. I haven't seen her since the night I ran. I didn't dare try to find her, not while that warrant was still active. I was terrified any contact would put her in danger, either from the house that took her in, or from whoever came looking for me. Yasaka listened with quiet, thoughtful attention, her centuries of political experience already turning over the practical dimensions of the situation. If your sister was taken in by a devil house following your master's death, she said, there will be records, formal ones, documenting the circumstances of that placement. Such records might prove considerably more useful in clearing your name than simply evading the hunter currently searching for you. Rossweisse, her own careful, analytical mind already working through the problem, nodded in agreement. If we can establish clearly what actually happened that night, the abuse that prompted your reaction, the fact that your actions were taken in defense of a vulnerable minor under that household's care, there is a reasonable chance the original warrant could be formally challenged, perhaps even overturned entirely, she said. Underworld law, whatever its flaws, does recognize legitimate self-defense and defense of others as mitigating circumstances, provided sufficient evidence can be presented. Issei, listening carefully while turning the practical challenge over in his mind, found himself thinking of the one connection the household maintained that might actually help navigate exactly this kind of formal underworld process. We should reach out to Rias, he said. She's got actual standing within the underworld's legal structures, and she's never once treated any of us like we needed to prove ourselves before she'd help. If anyone can help us access those old records properly, it's probably her. Kuroka looked up at that, something cautiously hopeful flickering behind her carefully guarded expression for the first time since the bounty hunter's arrival had been announced. You really think she'd help with something like this? She asked. It's not exactly a small favor to ask. She's helped us with plenty that wasn't small before, Issei said. And honestly, I think she'd want to help. This isn't about currying favor with the underworld, Kuroka. This is about getting you an actual chance to finally stop running from something that was never really your fault in the first place. Yasaka rose and moved to the writing desk in the corner of the room, already drafting the message that would carry their request to Rias by morning. While we wait for her response, she said, I believe it would also be wise for us to learn what we can about your sister's current situation. If she remains part of a devil house's peerage, reaching out carefully, through proper channels rather than a sudden reappearance that might endanger her standing, could prove valuable both for clearing your name and for finally allowing you the reunion you have clearly been denying yourself for years. Kuroka's composure finally cracked, just slightly, something raw and hopeful and frightened all at once passing behind her sharp eyes. I don't even know what I'd say to her, she admitted quietly. It's been so long. She might not even want to see me, after everything I put her through by disappearing the way I did. Rossweisse, moving to sit beside her with the same steady, understanding presence she had offered so many times before, rested a gentle hand against Kuroka's shoulder. You did not abandon her, she said firmly. You protected her, at tremendous cost to yourself, and then continued protecting her by staying away rather than risking her safety. Whatever she remembers of that night, I do not believe, knowing you as well as I have come to these past 2 years, that she could possibly hold that against you. I hope you're right, Kuroka said softly. We'll find out together, Issei said. Whatever this actually takes, however long it takes, you're not facing any of it alone anymore. That part's already decided. Later that night, after the household had finally retired, Issei found himself unable to sleep, his thoughts circling back to the raw, painful account Kuroka had shared, and to the quiet, fierce protectiveness he had felt building in himself throughout the entire conversation. He made his way to the training yard, finding Drake unusually reflective as well. I have watched a great many hosts across my centuries, partner, the dragon said quietly. Some carried old wounds of their own, wounds inflicted by those who should have protected them instead. I have never grown accustomed to how deeply such wounds can linger, even in someone as fierce and capable as Kuroka has proven herself to be these past 2 years. It makes me angry, Issei admitted. Not just at whoever hunted her down, but at the whole system that let something like that happen in the first place, that let her be blamed for protecting her own sister instead of holding the person actually responsible accountable. That anger is understandable, Drake said. I would counsel you, however, to let it fuel patience rather than recklessness. The kind of justice Kuroka actually needs will not come from anger alone, however righteous. It will come from exactly the kind of careful, determined work this household has always excelled at, the work of proving truth through evidence and testimony rather than merely through strength. Issei considered that for a long moment, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. You're right, he said finally. I just want to make sure she never has to feel like she's fighting this alone. Whatever it takes to prove what actually happened. She won't, Drake said, with quiet, unshakable certainty. Not with this household standing behind her. I do not believe that outcome exists anymore, partner, for anyone fortunate enough to call this place home. Issei remained in the training yard a while longer after that, watching the moon climb higher over the frost-tinged bamboo, feeling the deepened ley-line current hum patient and steady beneath his feet. He thought of every trial the household had already faced together, the Western Pass, the ancient shrine, Rossweisse confrontation with the Norse pantheon, and understood that this new trial, quieter and less dramatic though it might prove to be, mattered every bit as much as any battle they had fought before. Some fights aren't won with strength at all, he said quietly, more to himself than to Drake. This one's going to be won by just refusing to let her carry it alone anymore. That, Drake said, is very often the harder fight to win, partner. I am glad you understand that so clearly. Chapter 3. Rias's response arrived the following morning, carried by one of her own peerage members rather than a simple written message, a clear signal of exactly how seriously she intended to treat the household's request. I came personally because this deserves more than a hastily written reply, Rias said, settling into the main room with the same easy familiarity she had earned across 2 years of steady alliance. Warrants involving the death of a Devil House's master are taken seriously within the underworld's formal structures, but they are also, I regret to say, sometimes issued without proper investigation into the full circumstances involved. If Kuroka's account is accurate, and I have no reason to doubt it, there may well be grounds to have this warrant formally reviewed and overturned. Kuroka, seated across from her with careful, guarded hope, studied Rias's expression closely. What would that actually require, she asked. Rias considered the question seriously. Testimony, first and foremost, she said. Ideally from anyone who witnessed the treatment you and your sister endured under your former master's household, or who can speak credibly to his documented character and conduct. Formal records from the Devil House that took your sister in afterward would also help considerably, particularly if they include any account of her condition or statements made at the time of her placement. I can access certain underworld archives directly through my own house's standing, but locating witnesses willing to speak on your behalf may prove more difficult. Yasaka, listening with her usual careful attention, offered her own thoughtful addition. I may be able to assist there, she said. Yokai territories occasionally shelter former Devil House staff who left service under difficult circumstances, much as Kuroka herself once did. If any such individuals pass through territories connected to my own network over the years, I may be able to locate them, or at least learn whether anyone remembers the household in question. Rossweisse, her analytical mind already mapping the practical steps ahead, nodded firmly. Then our approach becomes clear, she said. Rias pursues the formal archives, Yasaka reaches out through her network for potential witnesses, and Kuroka provides whatever detailed account she can bear to share, however difficult that may prove. I would suggest we also consider reaching out to her sister directly, carefully, through Rias's own connections, both to gather any testimony she might be willing to offer, and because I do not believe any resolution here will feel complete without that reunion finally taking place. Kuroka's breath caught slightly at that, old fear and cautious hope visibly warring behind her expression. You'd really help me find her, she asked Rias directly. Even though I'm basically asking you to reopen a case against one of your own kind's households. Rias's expression softened into something genuinely warm, the same easy warmth she had shown the household since her earliest visits to Kyoto. I did not become your ally because it was politically convenient, Kuroka, she said. I became your ally because this household has shown me, again and again, exactly what genuine loyalty and genuine justice actually look like. If a warrant was issued without proper investigation into a child protecting her sister from documented abuse, that is not justice. That is precisely the kind of failure I would want corrected, whether or not it happened to involve my own kind's household. Issei, watching the exchange with quiet, grateful satisfaction, felt Drake stir within him with the same warm approval that had followed every previous demonstration of the alliances they had built over 2 years. This is exactly why building this the way we did mattered, he said. Not just for us. For moments like this, when someone we care about needs more than just our own strength to make things right. Drake's voice carried quiet agreement. Indeed, partner, the dragon said. Strength alone could not resolve a matter buried this deeply in underworld formality. It required precisely the kind of trust and alliance this household has spent 2 years carefully building. I suspect that lesson will prove valuable again, long after this particular trial has been resolved. Before departing, Rias paused at the threshold, her expression turning more serious as she addressed Kuroka directly one final time. I want you to understand something, she said. This process may take weeks, possibly longer, and there is no guarantee the underworld's formal structures will move as quickly or as fairly as any of us would prefer. I do not say this to discourage you, only so that you enter this with clear eyes rather than false expectations of an easy resolution. Kuroka met her gaze steadily, something hard-won and resilient settling behind her earlier fear. I've been carrying this fear for years, she said. I can carry the weight too, especially knowing I'm not carrying it alone anymore. Whatever it takes, I'd rather face it honestly than keep running from it forever. That, Rias said, with genuine admiration coloring her voice, is exactly the kind of conviction that tends to move even the most stubborn underworld proceedings along faster than expected. I will keep you updated with whatever I learn, as soon as I learn it. As Rias departed to begin her own inquiries, the household settled into the same patient, determined rhythm that had carried them through every previous trial, each of them taking up their part of the work ahead with quiet, unwavering resolve. Chapter 4. The bounty hunter arrived at the household's door 2 days later, evidently having tracked Kuroka's presence within Kyoto's borders despite the household's careful efforts to keep her whereabouts quiet while the investigation gathered momentum. He introduced himself simply as Vashton, a lean, weathered devil whose plain traveling clothes gave no obvious indication of house affiliation, though the old, official warrant scroll he carried bore an unmistakable formal seal. I've been tracking this warrant for the better part of 2 years, he said, his tone carrying more professional weariness than any particular malice. I don't take pleasure in this work, but a contract's a contract, and this one's been open considerably longer than most I take on. Issei stepped forward, positioning himself deliberately between the hunter and the rest of the household, gold-threaded scales settling steady along both arms in a clear, controlled display of exactly what challenging this household actually meant. Before you do anything with that warrant, he said, I'd ask you to hear the full story behind it. I don't think you have all the facts, and I think once you do, you'll understand why we're already working to have it formally overturned. Vashton studied him with careful, calculating attention, clearly recognizing exactly whose territory he had walked into. I've heard the rumors about this household, he said. Sovereign security, allied with the nine-tailed fox, formal recognition from the underworld's great houses. I'm not looking for a fight I can't win, security. But I've also got a contract to fulfill, and reputation alone doesn't discharge that obligation. Kuroka stepped forward as well, her earlier fear visibly steadying into the same fierce, settled resolve Issei had watched her build across 2 years of trials faced together. Then let me tell you what actually happened that night, she said, and proceeded to recount, with careful, deliberate honesty, the same painful history she had shared with the household days before, her former master's cruelty, her sister's danger, the desperate, uncontrolled reaction that had ended his life in the act of protecting someone she loved. Vashton listened in silence, his weathered expression shifting gradually from professional detachment into something more troubled as the account unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning the old warrant scroll over slowly in his hands. I won't pretend that account doesn't complicate things, he admitted finally. Contracts like this rarely include the kind of context you just gave me. I was hired to retrieve or eliminate a rogue Nekishu wanted for murdering her master. Nobody mentioned defense of a minor, or documented cruelty on the victim's part. That's precisely the problem we're working to correct through proper channels, Rossweisse said, stepping forward with her usual measured, careful authority. We have already reached out to Lady Gremory of the Gremory House, who is assisting us in petitioning for a formal review of the original warrant. If you pursue this contract now, before that review concludes, you risk enforcing a judgment that may well be overturned within weeks. Vashton considered that for a long, weighing moment, his professional instincts visibly warring with the troubled uncertainty Kuroka's account had clearly stirred in him. I've been doing this work a long time, he said finally. Long enough to know when a contract's gone sour on its own terms. I'll hold off, for now, provided your petition moves forward as you say it will. But I'll be honest with you, security. If that review doesn't happen, or doesn't go the way you're hoping, I'll be back, and next time I won't have the luxury of hearing the full story first. That's more than fair, Issei said. And for what it's worth, I appreciate you actually listening instead of just following the contract blindly. Not everyone would have. Vashton's weathered expression carried something almost like respect as he turned to depart. Contracts pay the bills, he said. They don't excuse ignoring the truth once it's standing right in front of you. I'll be watching for word of that review. I hope, for her sake, it goes the way you're expecting. Once he had departed, the tension that had gripped the household through the confrontation finally began to ease, though Kuroka remained visibly shaken by how close the encounter had come to turning dangerous. Yasaka moved to her side immediately, resting a steady, reassuring hand against her shoulder. That went better than I feared it might, Yasaka said. Vashton strikes me as a rare kind of hunter, one who still values truth over blind contract fulfillment. Not every bounty hunter would have paused to listen the way he did. I was so sure he just tried to take me the moment he found me, Kuroka admitted, her voice still unsteady. I've been running from exactly that moment for years. Having him actually stop and listen, it caught me completely off guard. Rossweisse, watching her with quiet, careful attention, offered her own steady reassurance. You handled that with remarkable courage, she said. Telling that story again, to a stranger whose intentions you could not be certain of, that took more bravery than I think you are giving yourself credit for. Issei, still watching the tree line where Vashton had disappeared, felt the same protective resolve that had carried him through the confrontation settle into quiet determination. We need to move quickly now, he said. He's giving us a window, but it won't stay open forever. Let's make sure that formal review happens as fast as we can possibly manage it. Chapter 5. The weeks that followed unfolded with the same patient, determined energy the household had brought to every previous trial, Rias's careful search through underworld archives gradually turning up formal records confirming her former master's household staff had filed multiple prior complaints regarding his conduct, complaints that had, troublingly, been dismissed without proper investigation each time they were raised. That alone should carry considerable weight, Rias said, delivering the findings personally during one of her now regular visits to Kyoto. A pattern of documented, dismissed complaints establishes that his conduct was known and repeatedly ignored by the house's own oversight structure. It does not prove the specifics of that final night, but it substantially undermines any claim that his household was the innocent victim of an unprovoked attack. Yasaka's own inquiries through her network of contacts yielded an even more significant discovery. A former member of the household staff, a young imp who had served alongside Kuroka during those difficult years, now sheltering quietly within a yokai territory several days' travel from Kyoto, having left Devil's service under her own difficult circumstances not long after the incident in question. Her name is Pell, Yasaka reported, and by all accounts she witnessed a great deal of what occurred within that household during the final months before your departure, Kuroka. I have sent careful, respectful word asking whether she would be willing to speak with us. I did not press for immediate answer, understanding how difficult it may be for her to revisit that period. Kuroka absorbed the news with visible, cautious hope, the careful composure she had maintained through weeks of anxious waiting finally showing genuine cracks of relief. If she's willing to testify to what she saw, she said, that could actually make a real difference, couldn't it? It could make all the difference, Rossweisse confirmed. Formal testimony from a witness who directly observed the pattern of abuse, combined with the documented prior complaints Rias has already uncovered, would provide exactly the kind of evidence the underworld's review process typically requires to overturn a warrant of this nature. Pell's response arrived within the week, carried by one of Yasaka's own trusted messengers, and though her written words were careful and clearly still colored by old, difficult memory, she confirmed her willingness to travel to Kyoto and provide formal testimony on Kuroka's behalf. I remember that household well, she had written. I remember what he was, and I remember you, Kuroka, protecting your sister the only way any of us ever saw a chance to. I should have spoken up years ago. I am glad you finally have people around you capable of helping you seek the justice that situation always deserved. Kuroka read the letter twice through, her hands visibly unsteady by the second pass, before setting it down carefully on the low table and allowing herself, for the first time since the bounty hunter's arrival weeks before, a genuine, unguarded moment of relief. She remembers, she said quietly. She actually remembers, and she's willing to say so. Issei, watching her carefully across the table, felt the same fierce, protective warmth that had carried him through every trial the household had faced settled deep into his chest. Of course she remembers, he said gently. What you did that night, protecting your sister at that kind of cost, that's not something anyone who witnessed it could easily forget. I think you're finally starting to see that the story you've been carrying alone all this time was never as isolated as it felt. Kuroka looked up at him, at Rossweisse's steady, supportive presence beside her, at Yasaka's warm, ancient patience watching over the whole exchange, and felt something long buried finally begin, cautiously, to loosen in her chest. I think you might be right, she admitted softly. I just have to actually let myself believe it holds. You don't have to believe it alone either, Rossweisse said. That's rather the entire point of everything we've built here. Pell arrived in Kyoto 3 days later, a small, nervous imp whose careful, hesitant manner spoke of years spent trying to forget the household she had once served alongside Kuroka. Yasaka welcomed her personally, offering the same warm, patient hospitality she extended to every wounded soul who found their way to Kyoto's borders, and by the time she sat down with the household that evening, some of her initial nervousness had visibly eased. I never forgave myself for staying silent as long as I did, Pell admitted, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she had barely touched. I saw what he did to that household staff, especially to the young ones. I told myself there was nothing I could do, that speaking up would only get me hurt too. I've carried that guilt for a long time. When Lady Yasaka's message reached me, I knew I couldn't stay silent again, not when it might actually help set something right. Kuroka, listening with quiet, grateful attention, reached across the table to rest a hand gently over Pell's own. You don't owe me an apology, she said. You were scared, same as I was. What matters is that you're here now, willing to help. That's more than most people would ever risk. Pell's expression softened with visible relief at Kuroka's easy forgiveness, and over the following hour, she recounted, in careful, detailed testimony, Everything she remembered from those difficult years, the pattern of cruelty, the repeated complaints dismissed without investigation, and finally, the night everything had changed, corroborating every detail of Kuroka's own account with the steady, credible weight of an independent witness. This is exactly the kind of testimony the review process will need, Rossweisse said once Pell finished, careful satisfaction evident in her voice. Combined with the archival records Rias is gathering, I believe we now have a genuinely strong case to present. Yasaka nodded in solemn agreement. Then we are ready to move forward formally, she said. I will send word to Rias immediately. Whatever remains of this trial, I do not believe it will need to stretch on much longer now. Before Pell departed the following morning, Kuroka sought her out one final time, finding her packing her few belongings with the same careful, quiet manner she had carried throughout her visit. I wanted to thank you properly, Kuroka said, before you go. What you did yesterday, that took real courage, especially after everything you must have gone through leaving that household yourself. Pell paused, considering her words carefully before answering. I think I needed this as much as you did, honestly, she admitted. I've carried guilt over my silence for a long time. Getting to finally speak the truth, and watching it actually matter, that's given me something I didn't realize I still needed. So thank you, for giving me the chance to finally set that down too. Kuroka embraced her warmly before she departed, and stood watching the small imp's careful, retreating figure long after she had disappeared beyond the tree line, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, that the truth of what had happened all those years ago was finally, fully being carried by more than just herself alone. Chapter 6. The formal review convened 3 weeks later, held not in Kyoto but within a modest, formal chamber in the underworld itself, Rias having carefully arranged the proceedings before a panel of magistrates known for their measured, careful approach to exactly the kind of complicated case Kuroka's warrant represented. Issei, Yasaka, and Rossweisse accompanied her for the proceedings, a clear, visible demonstration of the household's unwavering support that Rias herself had suggested would carry considerable weight before a panel accustomed to weighing formal standing alongside evidence. Kuroka, dressed carefully for the occasion though visibly nervous beneath her composed exterior, sat at the center of the chamber as the magistrates reviewed the accumulated evidence, the documented prior complaints, Pell's careful, detailed testimony, and finally Kuroka's own account, delivered with the same raw, unflinching honesty she had first shared with the household weeks before. The lead magistrate, an older devil with sharp, careful eyes that missed little through the entire proceeding, studied the assembled evidence for a long, weighing silence before finally addressing the chamber. This panel has reviewed considerable evidence today, she said, evidence that was, troublingly, available at the time of the original warrant's issuance but was never properly investigated before judgment was rendered. Multiple documented complaints regarding the deceased's conduct, dismissed without proper follow-up. Direct witness testimony confirming a sustained pattern of abuse toward household staff, including toward a minor under the deceased's direct authority. And an account from the accused herself that remains, upon careful scrutiny, entirely consistent with every other piece of evidence presented today. Kuroka sat rigid, barely breathing, as the magistrate continued, her earlier nervous composure giving way to something closer to held breath entirely. It is the finding of this panel, the magistrate said, that the actions taken on the night in question constitute legitimate defense of a minor under documented, sustained threat, rather than the unprovoked murder originally charged. The warrant issued against Kuroka, formerly of the Shrikant Devil House, is hereby formally overturned, her name cleared of the original charge, and this panel further recommends a formal inquiry into how the original investigation failed to identify evidence that was, by today's review, readily available at the time. The chamber fell into a moment of stunned, disbelieving silence before Rossweisse, seated beside Kuroka, reached out to grip her hand tightly, and Yasaka's expression bloomed into open, radiant relief that carried none of her usual careful, measured composure. Kuroka herself remained frozen for a long moment, as though the words had not quite finished settling into something she could fully believe, before a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh finally broke free of her. It's over, she said, barely audible. It's actually over. It is, Rias confirmed, moving to kneel before her with genuine, warm satisfaction evident in her expression. formally, officially, and permanently. Whatever weight you have carried these past years, Kuroka, you no longer need to carry it. This panel's judgment is final and binding across every house within the underworld's formal structure. Issei, watching the scene unfold with the same fierce, protective joy that had carried him through every trial the household had faced, felt Drake stir within him with unmistakable warmth. Well earned, partner, the dragon said quietly. I do not believe there exists a more satisfying outcome than watching an old, undeserved burden finally, fully set down. Kuroka rose unsteadily, and before anyone could say another word, threw her arms around Issei in a fierce, grateful embrace, her earlier composure entirely abandoned now in favor of pure, overwhelming relief. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. All of you. I don't think I have words for what this actually means. You don't need words, Issei said, holding her steady. Just let yourself feel it. You've earned every bit of this. The lead magistrate, watching the emotional scene unfold with a rare softening of her formal composure, allowed the household a moment before addressing them once more. I will also note, she said, that this panel was struck by the evident strength of the support surrounding the accused throughout this process. It is not common for a case of this nature to arrive with such thorough evidence, gathered with such evident care. Whoever assembled this petition on her behalf did remarkable work. Rias inclined her head respectfully. We simply gathered the truth, she said. It was always there, waiting for someone to take the time to look properly. As the formal proceedings concluded and the chamber began to empty, Yasaka moved to Kuroka's side, her ancient eyes carrying the same warm, unwavering pride she had shown throughout every trial the household had faced together. This is a debt none of us will ever ask you to repay, she said gently. You do not owe this household anything further for what has happened today. You have already given us everything simply by choosing, again and again, to trust us with the truth. Kuroka, still visibly overwhelmed, managed a shaky, grateful smile. I don't know how to thank any of you properly for this, she said. Words feel too small. Then don't worry about finding the right words, Rossweisse said gently. Just let us see you live freely, without that fear hanging over you any longer. That will be more than thanks enough. Chapter 7. Rias had arranged, with the same careful thoughtfulness she had shown throughout the entire process, for Kuroka's sister to be present at the underworld chamber that same afternoon, waiting in a quiet antechamber rather than the formal hearing itself, spared the difficulty of witnessing the proceedings directly while still remaining close enough to be reunited the moment the judgment was rendered. Kuroka froze at the antechamber's threshold, years of careful, guarded distance suddenly colliding with the reality of what waited just beyond the door. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted quietly, her earlier relief giving way to a new, different kind of fear entirely. What if she's angry? What if she doesn't even remember me the way I remember her? Rossweisse, standing steady at her side, offered the same gentle, unwavering support she had provided through every difficult moment of the weeks before. Then you will face that too, together with all of us standing behind you, she said. But I do not believe, watching everything you have shown us these past years, that love built as deeply as yours for your sister simply fades because of distance and fear. Go to her, Kuroka. Whatever waits on the other side of that door, you do not have to face it wondering any longer. Kuroka drew a steadying breath and pushed open the door. The young woman waiting inside looked up immediately, white hair falling loose around a pale, striking face, golden eyes widening the instant they landed on Kuroka standing in the doorway. For a long, suspended moment neither of them moved, 2 years of formal terror and careful distance evaporating into a silence that carried more weight than either of them could easily voice. Ne-sama, Kaneko finally whispered, the old, familiar term slipping free before she seemed to fully register saying it, and then she was moving, crossing the small room in quick, unsteady steps to throw her arms around her sister with a fierceness that spoke of years of buried longing finally, fully released. Kuroka's composure shattered entirely, tears she had been holding back through the entire formal proceeding finally spilling free as she held her sister close, her hands trembling as they smoothed over white hair she had not touched in years. I'm so sorry, she said, the words tumbling out unsteady and raw. I'm so sorry I left you. I didn't know what else to do. I was so afraid of putting you in danger. I thought about you every single day, I promise I thought about you every single day. I know, Kaneko said, her own voice thick with emotion despite her usual quiet, reserved nature. I know why you left. I was so angry for so long, angry that you disappeared, angry that I didn't understand until I was older exactly what you'd actually done for me that night. I'm not angry anymore. I just miss you. I missed you so much. They held each other a while longer, years of separation and fear and careful, guarded survival finally given space to properly unravel, until Kaneko finally pulled back just far enough to look at her sister's face directly, studying her with careful, searching attention. You look different, she said. Happier. Whatever you've been doing these past years, it's been good to you. Kuroka laughed, wet and unsteady, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I found a home, she said. A real one. People who never once asked me to prove I deserved to stay before they offered me their trust. I want you to meet them properly, if you're willing. I think you'd like them. I think they're already going to love you the second they get the chance. Kaneko's gaze shifted past her sister toward the antechamber's open door, where Issei, Yasaka, and Rossweisse waited with quiet, respectful patience, giving the sisters exactly the space this reunion deserved before intruding on it further. Something in Kaneko's careful, guarded expression softened as she studied them, the same careful assessment Issei had come to recognize from every person who had ever walked cautiously into this household's orbit before finally, fully choosing to trust it. I'd like that, she said quietly. I'd like that very much. Kuroka pulled back just far enough to study her sister properly, taking in every detail of the young woman who had grown so much in the years they had spent apart. You've gotten so tall, she said, half laughing, half still overwhelmed. Last time I saw you, you barely came up to my shoulder. I've had a lot of years to grow, Kaneko said, a small, rare smile finally breaking through her usually reserved expression. Rias has taken good care of me. I want you to know that, so you don't spend any more time worrying about whether I was okay all this time. I was scared for a while, and sad for a lot longer than that, but I was okay. I had people looking out for me too. I'm so glad, Kuroka said, her voice breaking slightly around the words. I thought about you every single day, wondering if you'd found somewhere safe, if you were happy, if you'd even want to see me again after everything. I didn't dare hope for an answer this good. Kaneko reached up to wipe a stray tear from her sister's cheek with the same careful, gentle affection she remembered from childhood, the years of separation suddenly feeling considerably smaller than they had only moments before. I always wanted to see you again, she said. Every single day, too. I just didn't know if it would ever actually be safe enough to happen. It's safe now, Kuroka said firmly. I promise you, it's safe now. Chapter 8. The introduction, when it finally happened, unfolded with far less nervous tension than Kuroka had clearly braced herself for, Kaneko's careful, reserved manner settling almost immediately into quiet, curious warmth as Issei, Yasaka, and Rossweisse each greeted her with the same easy, unguarded welcome they had once extended to Kuroka herself. You're the one my sister keeps talking about, Kaneko said to Issei, studying him with the same careful, searching attention she had first turned on the household back in the antechamber. She says you're the reason she finally stopped running. I think she gives me more credit than I deserve, Issei said honestly. She's the one who did the hard part, actually choosing to trust us after everything that happened to make trusting anyone feel so dangerous. All we did was give her somewhere safe enough to make that choice. Kaneko's golden eyes studied him a moment longer before something that might have been the beginning of approval flickered behind her usually guarded expression. That's a fair answer, she said. Most people take more credit than they deserve when they're trying to impress someone's family. Rossweisse, listening with quiet amusement, offered her own warm greeting. I understand you currently serve within Lady Gremory's own peerage, she said. That speaks well of you. Rias does not extend that kind of trust carelessly. She's been good to me, Kaneko admitted. Better than I expected, honestly, given everything that happened before she took me in. But I've spent a long time wondering about my sister, wondering if she was even still alive somewhere. Getting the chance to actually see her again, to see that she found somewhere like this, that means more than I really know how to say properly right now. Yasaka, watching the exchange with the same warm, ancient patience she had shown every new arrival to the household across the years, offered a gentle addition of her own. "You are welcome here as well, Kaneko, whenever you wish to visit," she said. "Family, in this household, has never been measured merely by blood or formal obligation. It is measured by choice, freely made, again and again. Your sister has made that choice many times over these past 2 years. I suspect, watching you now, that you carried the same capacity for it." Kaneko's composed expression softened further at that, something quietly moved passing behind her golden eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I think I'd like that. Visiting, I mean. Rias has always said I'm welcome to explore my own connections outside the peerage, as long as I still come home for my own duties there." "That sounds like exactly the kind of balance worth having," Kuroka said, moving to stand beside her sister with an easy, protective warmth that carried none of the old fears she had lived with for so many years. "You get your own life, your own family there too, and now you get this. You don't have to choose between them. I don't think I could bear it if you did." "I don't think I'll ever have to," Kaneko said, leaning briefly into her sister's side with the same quiet affection she had shown throughout the reunion. "Not with people like these looking out for both of us now." The afternoon settled into easy, warm conversation after that, the formal weight of the day's earlier proceedings giving way to something considerably lighter, laughter and careful, curious questions passing between old family finally reunited and new family eager to welcome her properly into their circle. Issei, watching Kuroka's face carry an unguarded, radiant joy he had never quite seen from her before, felt dregs stir within him with the same warm satisfaction that had followed every previous trial the household had faced together. "This is precisely what all of it was worth, partner," the dragon observed quietly. "Not merely the strength to win a hearing, or the alliances required to gather proper evidence. This, right here. A family made whole again, because an empire built on genuine loyalty made room for exactly this kind of justice to finally be possible." As the evening wore on, Kaneko found a quiet moment alone with Issei near the edge of the garden, her characteristic reserve softening slightly now that the day's initial nervousness had fully faded. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "Not about my sister. About you, actually." Issei nodded, giving her his full attention. "Go ahead," he said. "Why did you help her?" Kaneko asked. "Really help her, I mean. Not just let her stay somewhere safe, but actually go through all of this trouble, reaching out to the underworld, gathering evidence, standing beside her through a formal hearing. That's not something most people would take on for someone they only met a couple of years ago." Issei considered the question seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer rather than a simple, easy one. "Because she chose to trust us, when trusting anyone was probably the hardest thing in the world for her to do," he said. "And because once someone makes that choice here, we don't just let it be conditional. We don't help people because we expect something back. We help them because that's what family actually means, at least the kind of family I want to keep building." Kaneko studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful and quietly moved passing behind her golden eyes. "That's a good answer," she said. "I think I understand now why she never wanted to leave." "I hope you'll want to keep visiting too," Issei said. "There's always room here, Kaneko. For you, and for anyone else who matters to the people already here." "I think I will," she said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her usual reserve. "I think I definitely will." Chapter 9. The return to Kyoto carried a lightness the household had not felt in weeks. The anxious tension that had shadowed every conversation since the bounty hunter's first arrival finally, fully dissolved into warm, unhurried relief. Kuroka spent much of the journey home recounting old, half-forgotten memories of her sister as a small child, stories she had clearly kept locked away for years, unwilling to revisit them while the fear of losing that connection permanently still hung over her. "She used to follow me everywhere," Kuroka said, a soft, nostalgic smile playing at her lips as they made their way back through the familiar countryside surrounding Kyoto. "Even when she was too small to keep up properly. I used to have to double back constantly just to make sure she hadn't gotten lost trying to catch up. I'd honestly forgotten how much I missed that, until I saw her again today, and it all just came rushing back at once." Rossweisse, walking beside her with quiet, attentive warmth, offered a gentle observation of her own. It is a particular kind of grief, losing contact with someone you love while still carrying every memory of who they were, she said. I do not think that grief ever fully vanishes. But I suspect, watching you today, that it transforms considerably once reunion becomes possible again. The memories stop being only painful reminders of what was lost, and become instead the foundation for whatever comes next. That's exactly it, Kuroka agreed. I spent so long thinking about her as this frozen memory, still small, still needing me to look out for her. Seeing her today, actually grown, actually capable and strong in her own right, it's strange. Good strange. I think I need some time to actually get used to it. Yasaka, walking at the group's head with the same warm, contented satisfaction she had carried since the hearing's resolution, glanced back with quiet approval. That adjustment is worth taking exactly as much time as you need, she said. There is no correct pace for rebuilding a bond that was interrupted so painfully. What matters is that the door between you is finally, fully open again. Everything else can unfold at whatever speed feels right to both of you. Issei, listening to the conversation with the same quiet satisfaction that had carried him through every trial the household had faced together, found his thoughts drifting toward how thoroughly this particular trial had differed from every previous one. There had been no coalition to repel, no formal representative to negotiate with through careful, measured strength. Only patient investigation, honest testimony, and the quiet, determined work of finally correcting an old, undeserved injustice. I think this might be my favorite kind of victory, honestly, he said. Not because it was easy, it definitely wasn't. But because nobody had to get hurt to make it happen. We just had to actually care enough to do the slow, careful work of getting it right. Drake's voice carried warm, thoughtful agreement. That is, I believe, precisely the kind of victory this household has always been best suited to achieve, the dragon said. Not through overwhelming force alone, though you have certainly demonstrated that capability many times over. Through patient, genuine care, applied consistently enough to actually change the outcome for someone who deserved considerably better than the fate originally handed to her. Kuroka, listening to the exchange with a fondness that had settled deep and permanent into her expression since the hearing's resolution, reached out to bump her shoulder affectionately against Issei's own. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think I could have gotten through any of this without every single one of you standing behind me the whole way. That's not something I'm ever going to stop being grateful for. You never have to stop being grateful, Issei said. Just like we're never going to stop standing behind you. That part doesn't change, whatever comes next. As they crossed back into Kyoto's familiar borders, the last light of the day settling gold and warm over the old capital's rooftops, Yasaka called a brief halt at the same tree line where she had first led Issei home nearly 3 years before. There is something fitting, she observed, about returning here, to this exact spot, carrying news this good. I have watched a great many trials resolve within these borders over the centuries, but few have felt as quietly, thoroughly satisfying as this one. Rossweisse, studying the familiar skyline with the same fond, settled contentment that had defined her every homecoming since her own trial the year before, nodded in agreement. There is something almost poetic in it, she said. This entire territory was built as a refuge for those the wider world discarded. Watching it extend that same refuge outward now, into the underworld itself, correcting an old injustice through patient, honest work, it feels like exactly the kind of legacy this place was always meant to build. Kuroka, wiping at her eyes one final time as the emotion of the day finally began to settle into something calmer, looked out over the city with open, unguarded affection. I used to think home was just wherever I happened to be hiding at the time, she said. I don't think that way anymore. Home is this. Actual people, actually choosing you, actually willing to fight for you even when it's hard and slow and complicated. I don't think I'll ever take that for granted again. None of us will, Issei said, and together they continued the final stretch home, the city's warm lights rising to greet them exactly as they always had. Chapter 10. Kaniko's first proper visit to Kyoto arrived 2 weeks later, Rias personally escorting her through the tree line at the city's border with the same warm, easy familiarity that had defined every one of her visits across the past 2 years, and the household gathered eagerly to welcome her, the garden strung once more with the same paper lanterns that had marked Rossweisse's celebration months before. I brought her myself, Rias explained, watching Kaneko take in the warm, glowing garden with quiet, evident wonder. Partly because I wanted to see this reunion continue properly, and partly, I confess, because I have grown rather fond of finding excuses to visit this household myself. You're welcome here any time, with or without an excuse, Issei said, and meant it fully. Kaneko wandered the garden with careful, curious attention, pausing at the same cherry tree where Kuroka had once confided her old fears about safety and belonging, now blooming again with the season's fresh growth. Kuroka joined her there, watching her sister's quiet, thoughtful expression with the same soft, unguarded affection that had become simply part of who she was these past 2 weeks. This place is really something, Kaneko said. I can see why you never wanted to leave it, once you found it. I almost didn't let myself believe I deserved to stay, at first, Kuroka admitted. Took a while to understand that nobody here was ever going to make me prove that. They just kept choosing me anyway, until I finally believed it enough to choose myself too. Kaneko considered that for a long moment, her golden eyes drifting toward Issei, Yasaka, and Rossweisse gathered warmly nearby, laughing easily together over something Kuroka could not quite hear from this distance. I think I understand that a little better now, she said. Watching you here today. You're different than I remember. Lighter somehow. Like you finally set something down you'd been carrying for a really long time. I did, Kuroka said simply. And I think watching you today too, that maybe you're starting to understand you don't have to carry everything alone either. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, you've got 2 families now instead of just one. That's not something either of us ever really had before. Kaneko's expression softened into something quietly grateful, and she leaned into her sister's side once more, comfortable in a way that spoke of old bonds finally, fully mended rather than merely reforged from scratch. I like that, she said. Having 2 families instead of none. As the evening deepened and the celebration continued warmly around them, Issei found a quiet moment to step back and simply observe the scene the household had built, Rossweisse deep in easy conversation with Rias, Yasaka watching over the gathering with the same warm, ancient patience she had carried since that very first night beside the fountain 3 years before now, and at the garden's heart, 2 sisters finally, fully reunited. Laughter passing easily between them for the first time in far too many years. Drake, quiet within him through most of the evening's celebration, finally spoke, his ancient voice carrying the same deep, settled satisfaction that had followed every trial the household had faced and overcome together. You have built something remarkable here, partner, the dragon said. Not merely an empire capable of withstanding invasion, or a household capable of winning formal disputes within the underworld's careful structures. A place capable of mending what the wider world had left broken. I do not believe there exists a higher measure of what true strength is actually meant to accomplish. Issei watched Kuroka throw her head back in genuine, unguarded laughter, her sister's hand still held loosely in her own, and felt the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every single trial since that very first desperate night settle, deeper now than ever, into his chest. Whatever the wider world still had waiting beyond Kyoto's borders, he understood, watching the warm, hard-won joy filling the garden around him, they would meet it exactly as they always had, together, and stronger for every broken thing they had already learned, patiently and faithfully, how to mend. Later that night, once the celebration had finally wound down and most of the guests had departed, Kuroka found Issei standing quietly near the koi pond at the garden's far edge, the reflected lantern light rippling gently across the water's dark surface. She settled beside him without a word, content simply to share the comfortable silence for a while before finally speaking. I keep thinking about how different tonight could have gone, she admitted. If that bounty hunter had shown up somewhere I was still running alone, still hiding, still too scared to ever let anyone close enough to actually help. I don't like to think about it, but I do anyway sometimes. Just to remind myself how much has actually changed. Issei considered her words carefully before responding. I think it's okay to think about it sometimes, he said. Not to torture yourself with it, just to actually appreciate how far you've come. You're not that person anymore, Kuroka. You haven't been for a long time now. I know, she said softly. I just wanted you to know I see it too. Every single day, honestly. I see how much you've built here, how much space you've made for people like me and Rossweisse, and now my sister to actually heal from things we never thought we'd get to heal from. I don't think you always give yourself enough credit for that. Issei felt a familiar warmth settle into his chest at her words, the same quiet, steady gratitude that had carried him through every trial the household had faced together. I think we built it together, he said. All of us. I couldn't have done any single part of this alone, not the training, not the trials, not tonight. You gave just as much to this place as I ever did. Kuroka smiled, resting her head lightly against his shoulder as they both watched the koi drift slowly beneath the rippling lantern light. Maybe we did, she said. Guess that's what makes it worth so much, then. Nobody built this alone. We all just kept choosing each other, one day at a time, until it turned into something this big. They sat together a while longer in comfortable, contented silence, the last of the evening's lanterns burning low around them, until the late hour finally drew them both back toward the warm, familiar house, and whatever quiet, ordinary joys the following morning would bring. Act 7. Chapter 1. Summer settled over Kyoto for the third time since Issei's arrival, the household's rhythms grown so steady and familiar that the sudden, urgent knock at the garden gate one warm evening felt almost jarring in its disruption of the ordinary peace. Kuroka reached the gate first, her sharp senses immediately registering something unusual about the visitor waiting beyond it. A lone woman cloaked in dark travel clothes, dark hair falling loose around a face that carried the particular, hunted wariness of someone who had traveled a long way carrying news she was afraid to deliver. I need to speak with the security, the woman said, her voice trembling slightly despite an obvious effort at composure. Please. It's urgent. It concerns Kokabile. Issei, arriving at the gate at the sound of the unfamiliar voice, felt Drago suddenly, sharply alert within him the moment the name registered. Rainier, the dragon said, quiet and grave. I did not expect to encounter her again, partner, and certainly not delivering a warning rather than a threat. Issei studied the woman carefully, recognition slowly surfacing beneath 2 years of distance, and everything that had changed since that terrible night beside the fountain. You're the one who attacked me, he said, not with anger exactly, but with careful, measured caution. That first night. Rainier flinched visibly at the acknowledgement, though she did not look away. I am, she admitted. I have spent 2 years trying to atone for what I nearly did to you, working quietly within Grigori's more moderate factions, trying to prevent exactly the kind of extremism that sent me after you in the first place. I would not have come here, would not have risked facing you again, if what I've learned wasn't serious enough to outweigh my own fear of your reaction. Yasaka arrived a moment later, her ancient senses having registered the disturbance as well, and studied the visitor with the same careful, measured authority she brought to every potential threat. Explain yourself quickly, she said. And explain why the name Kokabile arrives at my border alongside this warning. Rainier drew a steadying breath. Kokabile has grown restless, she said. He was never fully satisfied with Grigori's current leadership, believed for years that a decisive strike against either the underworld or the yokai factions would reignite the old wars, prove that fallen angels remain a force to be feared rather than merely tolerated. He's spent the past several months gathering support among the more radical elements of our ranks, and Kyoto, given everything it represents now, a security operating entirely outside traditional faction control, allied openly with devils, has become exactly the target he's been looking for. Issei felt the familiar, steady weight of responsibility settle into his chest, the same resolve that had carried him through every previous trial the household had faced. How serious is this, he asked. Is he actually moving, or just gathering support? Moving, Rainier said. Soon. I don't know the exact timeline, but I know he's secured enough backing now that he believes he can strike before Grigori's more moderate leadership can intervene to stop him. I came because, whatever happened between us that first night, I couldn't let that history stop me from warning you about something this serious. You deserve better than to be blindsided by an attack I could have prevented by speaking up. Yasaka's expression carried careful, weighing consideration as she studied the fallen angel standing anxious and exposed at her border. You risk a great deal, coming here, she observed. Kokabil's supporters would not treat this warning kindly, should they learn of it. I know, Rainier said quietly. I decided it was worth the risk. I've spent 2 years trying to become someone better than who I was that night in the park. This felt like exactly the kind of choice that actually proves it. Issei studied her a moment longer, feeling old, complicated history settle into something he hadn't quite expected to face again. Not anger exactly, but a strange, careful respect for the courage it had taken her to come here at all. Thank you, he said finally, for telling us. I know that couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Rainier admitted. But I'd rather live with the discomfort of facing you again than live with the guilt of staying silent while something like this happened. Kuroka, who had remained watchful and guarded throughout the exchange, finally spoke, studying Rainier with careful, searching attention. You said you've spent 2 years trying to atone, she said. That's not nothing. But I need to understand something before any of us decide how much to trust what you're telling us. Why should we believe Kokabil's threat is real, and not some kind of setup to catch us off guard? Rainier met her gaze steadily, understanding the caution behind the question. I don't blame you for asking, she said. If I were in your position, I'd want the same assurance. All I can offer is this. I have nothing to gain from lying to you. If Kokabil succeeds and I'm discovered to have warned you, my life is forfeit within Grigori's ranks. I'm risking everything by being here at all. I wouldn't take that risk for a lie. Yasaka studied her for a long, weighing moment, her centuries of accumulated wisdom clearly turning the claim over carefully before she finally spoke. I believe her, she said. Whatever history exists between you and Issei, whatever fear brought you to our door tonight, the risk she describes rings true. Deception rarely costs the deceiver quite this much to maintain. Issei nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle into the same careful, measured resolve that had carried him through every previous trial. Then we prepare as if this threat is real, he said, because I don't think we can afford to gamble on it not being. Whatever Kokabil intends, we're not going to be caught unprepared. Chapter 2. Yasaka offered Rainier shelter for the night, a gesture the fallen angel accepted with visible, grateful surprise, clearly having braced herself for a considerably colder reception given the history between her and the household's own sovereign. Once she had been settled into a quiet guest room, the household gathered in the main room to weigh what her warning actually meant. I have not thought about that night in a long time, Issei admitted, turning his teacup slowly between his hands. It's strange, having her show up here now, on the other side of everything, warning us instead of trying to kill me. People change, Rossweisse said quietly. I know that better than most, given how thoroughly I changed once I finally found reason to. I do not think her presence here tonight is something to dismiss lightly, whatever your history with her. Kuroka, curled thoughtfully nearby, added her own careful assessment. She didn't have to come here, she said. Could have just stayed quiet, let whatever's coming unfold without risking herself by warning us first. That's not nothing, even if it doesn't erase what she almost did to you that first night. Yasaka, who had remained thoughtfully quiet through much of the exchange, finally spoke, her ancient voice carrying the same careful gravity she brought to every serious threat the household had faced. Kokabil is not a name I take lightly, she said. I have crossed paths with him before, centuries ago, during a period of considerably greater tension between yokai and fallen angel factions. He is old, powerful, and has never fully accepted the fragile peace that eventually settled between our various worlds. If he has truly gathered enough support to move against us, we cannot afford to treat this warning as anything less than serious. Issei absorbed that with the same steady calculation that had carried him through every previous confrontation. What are we actually looking at? He asked. How dangerous is he, compared to everything we've already faced? Considerably more dangerous than the hero faction's coalition at the Western Pass, Yasaka said honestly. Kokabil commands genuine strength in his own right. Strength that predates most of the modern factions currently maintaining the supernatural world's fragile balance. If he moves against us with the backing Rainier describes, this will not be a confrontation we can resolve through restraint and careful diplomacy alone. It may require the full measure of what this household has built these past 3 years. Rossweisse, her analytical mind already turning toward practical preparation, spoke next. We should reach out to Rias immediately, she said. If Kokabile intends to draw the underworld into open conflict as well, she will need to know regardless. And we should consider whether heaven itself might have interest in intervening, given that a rogue fallen angel faction moving against established peace threatens their own interests, as much as ours. Drake, quiet through most of the evening's discussion, finally spoke, his ancient voice carrying a gravity that settled heavily over the gathered household. I have watched Kokabile's kind before, partner, the dragon said. Old grievances, nursed across centuries, rarely resolve themselves peacefully once they finally boil over. Whatever comes next, I do not believe it will be resolved as gently as the trials you have already overcome. I say this not to frighten you, but because I believe you deserve to enter this with clear eyes. Issei nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the coming trial settle deep into his resolve, mingled with the same steady certainty that had carried him through every previous confrontation the household had faced together. Then we prepare properly, he said. Whatever Kokabile thinks he's about to walk into, I want him to find exactly what every other threat that's tested Kyoto's borders has found. Something considerably stronger than he bargained for. Yasaka's expression carried quiet, unwavering resolve as she rose to begin the preparations the coming days would clearly demand. Then let us begin immediately, she said. We have very little time to waste, and a great deal that needs to be done before whatever Kokabile intends finally arrives at our doorstep. Later that night, once the household had scattered to begin their respective preparations, Issei found Rainier alone in the garden, watching the moon rise with the same careful, guarded stillness she had carried since her arrival. He hesitated only briefly before approaching, old history and new circumstance sitting uneasily together in his chest. I keep thinking about that night, he admitted, settling nearby without quite meeting her eyes at first. Not with anger, not anymore. Just trying to understand how someone goes from that to this. From nearly killing me to risking everything to warn me. Rainier was quiet for a long moment before answering. I was following orders I believed in back then, she said. I don't say that as an excuse. I say it because understanding how wrong I was took watching you refuse to become exactly the kind of person my superiors expected you to be. You could have hated every fallen angel after what I did. You could have built Kyoto as a fortress against anyone who looked like me. Instead you built something that made room for people like Kuroka, like Rossweisse, like anyone willing to actually choose something better. Watching that from a distance, over 2 years, it forced me to ask myself why I couldn't do the same. Issei considered her words carefully, feeling old, complicated tension finally begin to ease into something quieter. I'm glad you asked yourself that, he said. And I'm glad you're here now, on this side of it. So am I, Rainier said softly, and for a while the two of them simply sat together in the moonlit quiet, an old wound slowly, carefully beginning to close. Chapter 3. Rias arrived within a day of receiving Yasaka's urgent message, her expression carrying none of her usual easy warmth, replaced instead by the sharp, focused concern of someone who understood immediately the full weight of what a serious Kokabile threat actually meant. I've heard whispers of unrest within Grigori's ranks for months now, she said, settling into the war council that had once again gathered in Yasaka's great hall. I did not realize it had progressed this far. If Kokabile truly intends to strike against Kyoto, the underworld cannot simply stand aside and watch. This alliance was built for exactly this kind of moment. Issei, studying the map spread across the low table, the same map that had once guided their strategy at the Western Pass, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle into focused, determined calculation. What kind of support can the underworld actually offer, he asked. I don't want anyone risking themselves over a fight that started because of my own history with Grigori. Rias's expression softened slightly at that, though her voice remained firm. This is not merely your fight, Issei, she said. Kokabile's ambitions, if realized, threaten every faction currently maintaining the fragile peace between our worlds. The underworld has every reason to commit real support, not as a favor owed to an ally, but because our own interests are genuinely at stake here as well. Rossweisse, her careful strategic mind already mapping the practical dimensions of the coming confrontation, added her own thoughtful assessment. We should also consider reaching out to heaven directly, she said. If Rainier's account is accurate, Kokabiel's actions represent a rogue element within Grigori that Heaven's own interests would benefit from seeing contained. A coalition spanning devils, yokai, and moderate angelic factions would send an unmistakable message that this threat faces unified opposition rather than a single isolated territory. Yasaka nodded in thoughtful agreement, already drafting the careful diplomatic outreach such a coalition would require. I will reach out through my own contacts within Heaven's more moderate circles, she said. It has been some centuries since I maintained active correspondence there, but the relationships, I believe, remain salvageable given the seriousness of what we now face. Rainier, who had remained quietly present through much of the council's planning, finally spoke, her voice carrying careful, hesitant conviction. I may be able to help there as well, she said. I still maintain contact with several moderate voices within Grigori's own leadership, individuals who share my concerns about Kokabiel's growing influence. If they understood the full scope of what he intends, they might be willing to formally distance Grigori's leadership from his actions, or even actively work to contain him from within before this reaches open conflict at all. Issei studied her for a long moment, weighing the offer against the complicated history still sitting unresolved between them. That would help enormously, he said finally. And I want you to know, whatever happens after this, I appreciate you being willing to put yourself on the line like this. Twice now, actually. Rainier's expression carried quiet, grateful relief at the acknowledgement. I meant what I said last night, she said. I've spent 2 years trying to become someone better than who I was that night in the park. Helping properly, all the way through this. That feels like exactly the kind of chance I don't want to waste. The council continued long into the evening, strategies debated and refined with the same careful, determined energy that had carried the household through every previous trial, Rias's diplomatic reach, Yasaka's ancient wisdom, Rossweisse's disciplined strategic mind, and Rainier's unexpected but genuine willingness to help all converging toward a single, unified purpose, preparing Kyoto. And the wider alliance now gathering around it, for whatever Kokabiel intended to bring against them. Kuroka, who had spent much of the council quietly listening while the others debated strategy, finally spoke up with a practical concern of her own. What happens if this all moves faster than we're ready for, she asked. We're talking about reaching out to Heaven, coordinating with the underworld, all of that takes time. What if Kokabiel doesn't give us that time? Rossweisse considered the question seriously. That is a genuine risk, she acknowledged. Which is why I believe we should begin strengthening Kyoto's own defenses immediately, independent of whatever outside support we manage to secure. We should not build our strategy entirely around reinforcements that may or may not arrive in time. Yasaka nodded in firm agreement. Kuroka raises a fair concern, she said. We will prepare our own borders as though we expect to face this threat entirely alone, and treat any outside support as a welcome addition rather than a foundation we depend upon. That has always been the wiser approach, in my long experience. Issei, absorbing the practical wisdom of the exchange, felt his resolve harden further. Then let's split the work, he said. Rias and Rainier handle the diplomatic outreach, and the rest of us focus on making sure Kyoto's own defenses are as strong as they can possibly be, starting tomorrow morning. We don't wait around hoping help arrives in time. We make sure we're ready either way. That is precisely the right approach, Yasaka said, quiet pride evident in her voice. Whatever Kokabiel intends, he will find Kyoto prepared, regardless of how quickly he chooses to move. Rias, before departing to begin her own portion of the coming work, paused at the threshold with one final, thoughtful addition. I should also warn you, she said, that mobilizing formal support from either the underworld or Heaven, even in a situation this serious, will require navigating no small amount of institutional caution. Not every house within either faction shares my own eagerness to act quickly. I will do everything within my power to secure genuine, timely support, but I want you entering this with realistic expectations rather than assuming reinforcements will simply appear the moment we request them. Issei nodded, appreciating her honesty even as it added weight to the days ahead. We'll prepare as though we're facing this alone, he said, echoing the same resolve the council had already settled upon. Anything beyond that is a welcome bonus, not something we're counting on. That is exactly the right mindset, Rias said, offering him a final, encouraging smile before departing into the gathering evening. I will move as quickly as I possibly can. Whatever support I can secure, I promise you it will not be for lack of effort on my part. As her retreating figure disappeared beyond the garden gate, the household settled into the focused, determined rhythm of preparation, each of them carrying their assigned portion of the coming work with the same quiet, unwavering resolve that had carried them through every previous trial they had faced together across 3 remarkable years. Chapter 4. The warning, when it finally came, arrived faster than even Rainer's urgent account had suggested, a full week of careful preparation cut short by a sudden, violent disturbance rippling through Kyoto's northern ley lines just before dawn, the same ancient channels that had once carried Issei's desperate reach for survival on his very first night in the city now singing with a very different, far more threatening resonance. Yasaka felt it first, waking the household with the same sharp, immediate urgency she had shown only twice before, the morning of the hero faction's first incursion, and the tense confrontation with the Norse pantheon. "He's here," she said, already moving toward the training yard. "Sooner than we expected." He must have learned Grigori's moderates were mobilizing against him and decided to strike before they could act. The household assembled with the same practiced, determined speed they had honed across 3 years of trials faced together, gold-threaded scales settling steady along Issei's arms as the deep infusion of senjutsu, dragon fire, and the first flame's ancient gift rose to answer the moment's urgent demand. Kuroka and Rossweisse flanked him without needing to be told, and Yasaka's 9 tails gathered gold light along their tips as the household moved together toward the northern border where Kokubil's forces had begun their advance. What they found waiting at the border exceeded even Yasaka's careful warnings, a formation of fallen angels considerably more organized and disciplined than the hero faction's earlier coalition had ever managed, dark wings filling the pre-dawn sky in tight, coordinated ranks, and at their center, a figure of unmistakable, ancient power, black hair shot through with streaks of gray. Wings vast and dark enough to blot out the fading stars behind him. "Kokubil," Yasaka said, her voice carrying old, wary recognition. "It has been many centuries since I last stood against you directly." The fallen angel's expression carried cold, contemptuous amusement as his gaze swept across the assembled household. "The 9-tailed fox, still clinging to this quiet little territory," he said. "And the rumored security everyone insists on treating as some unprecedented threat. I confess I expected something more impressive than a boy and his collected strays." Issei felt Drake's presence settle steady and certain within him, the same controlled resolve that had carried him through every previous confrontation the household had faced. "You're welcome to test that assumption," he said evenly. "Though I'd think carefully first. Every single force that's underestimated this household so far has walked away considerably more humbled than they arrived." Kokubil's cold amusement sharpened into something colder still. "Bold words, from someone who has never actually faced a true test," he said. "The hero faction's rabble, the Norse pantheon's careful diplomacy, these were never real trials, boy. I intend to show you, and every faction watching this confrontation unfold, exactly what a genuine threat actually looks like." Rossweisse, her strategic mind already assessing the formation arrayed against them, spoke quietly to Issei alone. "Their numbers are considerable," she said, "but disciplined rather than overwhelming. If we can hold the initial advance long enough for Rias's forces and Heaven's promised support to arrive, I believe we stand a genuine chance of turning this confrontation decisively in our favor." Issei nodded, feeling the deepened current of power settle steady and certain beneath his focus, the accumulated strength of 3 years of trials faced and overcome finally converging toward whatever this confrontation would demand of him. "Then let's hold that line," he said, and as Kokubil's dark wings flared wide in preparation for the first devastating strike, the household braced together, exactly as they always had, to meet whatever storm was about to break against them. Kuroka, positioned at Issei's flank with fierce, focused readiness, cast a quick glance toward Rossweisse before addressing the whole group in a low, urgent voice. "Whatever happens," she said, "we stick to the formation we drilled. Nobody gets isolated, nobody tries to be a hero on their own. We hold together, or we don't hold at all." Rossweisse nodded firmly in agreement. "Precisely," she said. "Kokubil wants us to panic, to break formation chasing quick individual victories. We deny him that satisfaction. Disciplined, coordinated resistance is what turned back the hero faction's coalition at the Western Pass, and it is what will turn back this threat as well. Yasaka, already moving to take her position at the formation's flank, called back one final, steadying reminder before the battle's opening exchange. "Remember why we fight," she said. "Not for conquest, not for pride, but for everything this territory has become, a home worth defending for everyone sheltered within it. Hold to that purpose, and I do not believe any force Kokobile brings against us will prove sufficient to break it." Chapter 5. The first exchange came fast and brutal, Kokobile's opening strike a massive lance of dark, condensed light that tore through the pre-dawn sky with enough force to splinter the ancient trees along Kyoto's northern border, and Issei met it head-on, gold-threaded scale blazing bright as he caught the strike on a raised, braced arm, the ley-line current beneath his feet surging to absorb and redirect the impact rather than simply weather it. The ground beneath him cratered from the force of the collision, but he held, and Kokobile's expression flickered with the first genuine surprise since his arrival. "Interesting," the fallen angel said. "Perhaps you are not entirely the disappointment I expected." Around them, the battle exploded into full, chaotic engagement, Kokobile's disciplined ranks pressing forward against Yasaka's own gathered forces, yokai soldiers meeting fallen angel warriors in fierce, coordinated combat across the border's rapidly widening battlefield. Rossweisse moved through the chaos with the same practiced, economical precision that had carried her through the Western Pass years before, her blade catching and turning aside strikes that would have felled a lesser soldier instantly. Kuroka fought with fierce, fluid grace, her earlier trials having sharpened her already formidable instincts into something considerably more dangerous, disarming and disabling opponents with the same restraint the household had always tried to maintain even in the heart of genuine battle. Yasaka herself matched Kokobile's lieutenants directly, 9 golden tails weaving through the dawn sky in patterns that sent arcs of controlled, devastating fire rolling across the fallen angel formation, her centuries of accumulated strength finally given full, unrestrained expression against a threat serious enough to warrant it. Issei, locked in direct, escalating combat with Kokobile himself, felt the deep infusion of power surging steadily through him, Senjutsu and dragon fire and the first flame's ancient gift converging into a controlled, relentless current that met every strike Kokobile threw against him with equal, unwavering force. The fallen angel's confidence, so cold and contemptuous at the confrontation's opening, began to fracture visibly with every exchange that failed to break through Issei's careful, disciplined defense. "You've grown considerably stronger than the rumors suggested," Kokobile admitted, breathing harder now, the first genuine strain showing behind his ancient composure. "Perhaps this will prove a worthwhile test after all. It doesn't have to be a fight to the end," Issei said, even as he pressed his own counterattack forward, gold and crimson light meeting Kokobile's dark power in a devastating exchange that scattered debris and scorched earth across the widening battlefield. "You could still call this off. Whatever grudge you're carrying against the old peace, it doesn't have to end with more people getting hurt over it." Kokobile's laugh carried genuine, ancient amusement, utterly without warmth. "You misunderstand me, boy," he said. "I do not fight for grudges. I fight because peace built on quiet complacency is a peace that forgets what true strength actually costs to maintain. I intend to remind every faction watching this battle exactly what that cost looks like, whether that lesson comes through your defeat, or through the deaths of everyone who chose to stand beside you." Issei felt something harden in his resolve at that, the same fierce, protective conviction that had carried him through every previous trial the household had faced together. "Then you're about to learn exactly the opposite lesson," he said, and released the full, controlled current of everything 3 years of trials had built within him, gold-threaded light erupting outward in a decisive, overwhelming wave that finally, unmistakably began to turn the tide of the battle raging around them. Nearby, Yasaka pressed her own advantage against Kokobile's lieutenants with renewed, fierce determination, her 9 tails weaving intricate patterns of golden fire that drove her opponents steadily backward across the scarred, battle-worn ground. One of the fallen angel commanders, recognizing the shifting momentum, called out sharply to his companions, and for a moment the fallen angel formation wavered, uncertainty rippling visibly through ranks that had marched confident into battle only hours before. Rossweisse, fighting at Kuroka's side with the same disciplined, economical precision that had carried her through the Western Pass years before, called out a sharp warning as a fresh wave of Kokabil's reserves attempted to flank their position. "Hold formation," she shouted, her voice cutting clearly through the chaos. "Do not let them regroup. We break their center, we break their will to continue." Kuroka answered with fierce, focused speed, weaving between two attackers and disarming both before they fully registered she had moved, her earlier trials having sharpened instincts that had already been formidable into something considerably more dangerous. "Working on it," she called back, grinning fiercely despite the exhaustion beginning to show in her movements. "These guys really aren't used to actually being pushed back." The battle's tide, so uncertain only minutes before, began now to shift decisively in the household's favor, 3 years of accumulated trust and hard-won strength finally proving themselves against the threat that had believed itself unstoppable. Kokabil, sensing the shift even as he continued his direct exchange with Issei, pressed harder, dark energy gathering thick and violent around his clenched fist. "If strength alone will not break you," he said, his ancient voice carrying genuine, mounting frustration, "then perhaps I have simply not yet shown you the true extent of what I am capable of." Issei braced himself as Kokabil unleashed a devastating barrage, dark spears of condensed light raining down with punishing speed and force, and though several found their mark, scoring deep gouges across his gold-threaded scale, he held his ground, the deepened current of senjutsu and dragon fire, and the first flame's ancient gift absorbing and redistributing the impact rather than allowing it to break through entirely. "You keep talking about proving something," Issei said, breathing hard but unbroken, as the barrage finally eased. "I don't think you're trying to prove anything to me anymore, Kokabil. I think you're trying to prove it to yourself, because some part of you already knows this fight isn't going the way you expected." Kokabil's expression flickered, just for a moment, something uncertain and old passing behind his ancient, weathered features before hardening back into cold determination. "You know nothing of what drives me, boy," he snarled, and pressed his assault forward once more, though Issei could feel, even through the renewed intensity of the exchange, that something in the ancient fallen angel's resolve had already begun, irrevocably, to crack. Chapter 6. The battle raged on as the sun finally cleared the eastern horizon, gold morning light spilling across a battlefield scarred by 3 years of accumulated strength finally given full, decisive expression. And it was into that hard-fought, still uncertain struggle that the promised reinforcements finally arrived. Rias descended first, her own peerage spreading out behind her in coordinated, disciplined formation, crimson magic joining the battle's chaos with the same fierce, determined purpose that had defined every one of her visits to Kyoto across the years of their alliance. Close behind her, a smaller but unmistakably significant contingent of angelic warriors descended from the brightening sky, bearing the formal insignia of heaven's more moderate factions, exactly the intervention Rainer's careful diplomacy had worked so hard to secure. Kokabil's expression, already strained from the sustained intensity of his confrontation with Issei, shifted into something colder and more calculating as he registered the arriving reinforcements. "You called in favors from both the underworld and heaven itself," he observed, a grudging note of respect entering his ancient voice despite the obvious frustration beneath it. "I confess I did not expect this level of coordinated response. You underestimated exactly what this household has built," Issei said, pressing his advantage as Kokabil's forces began to visibly falter under the combined weight of the arriving coalition. "Everyone here chose to stand together freely, Kokabil. That's not something a single overwhelming strike was ever going to break." Rainer, fighting alongside the angelic contingent with fierce, redemptive determination, called out sharply as she recognized several of Kokabil's own lieutenants beginning to waver. "This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed," she shouted, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos. "Grigori's own leadership has already condemned this attack. You're fighting for a cause your own faction no longer stands behind." The words visibly rippled through Kokabil's remaining forces, uncertainty spreading through ranks that had marched confident into battle only hours before, and Kokabil himself, sensing the shifting tide with the sharp, calculating awareness of an ancient warrior who understood precisely when a battle had turned irrecoverably against him, drew back with a snarl of frustrated, grudging acknowledgement. "This is not over," he said, his dark wings beating hard against the morning air as he prepared to withdraw what remained of his shattered formation. "But I will grant you this much, Security. You have proven yourself a considerably more formidable obstacle than I anticipated." Issei, breathing hard but steady, gold-threaded scales still burning bright along both arms, met the ancient fallen angel's retreat with the same measured restraint that had defined every previous confrontation the household had faced. "Then maybe it's time you actually considered whether this fight was ever worth having in the first place," he said. "Kyoto doesn't want more war, Kokabile. It never did. But we'll meet whatever you bring against us for exactly as long as it takes you to understand that." Kokabile's retreat carried him and his remaining forces swiftly beyond the battlefield's edge, the dawn sky finally clearing of the chaos that had filled it since before sunrise, and as the coalition's combined forces settled into the exhausted, relieved aftermath of a battle won through unified strength rather than any single overwhelming force, Issei felt the deepened current of power within him finally begin to settle. The accumulated strength of 3 years of trials having proven decisively exactly what it had been built to protect. Rias approached him amid the battlefield's settling dust, her own exhaustion evident but her expression carrying unmistakable satisfaction. "That was closer than I would have liked," she admitted. "But we held. All of us together." I do not believe Kokabile expected quite this level of coordinated resistance. Yasaka joined them a moment later, her 9 tails finally settling from their earlier, fierce readiness into something calmer, though her ancient eyes remained watchful, scanning the retreating fallen angel forces for any sign of a second wave that never came. "He will not return today," she said with quiet certainty. "Whatever pride he carried into this battle, he has learned the cost of underestimating what we have built here. That lesson, I suspect, will linger considerably longer than his wounded ego might prefer to admit." Rossweisse, moving among the wounded with the same careful, practical attention she brought to every aftermath, called out that the household's own losses, while not insignificant, had been kept remarkably light given the scale of the confrontation. "No fatalities among our own forces," she reported, relief evident beneath her usual measured composure. "Several serious injuries, but nothing beyond what our healers can manage." Issei felt a wave of profound relief wash through him at the news, the same fierce, protective concern that had carried him through the battle finally easing into grateful exhaustion. "Then we did it," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone in particular. "We actually held." "You did more than hold," Drake said, his ancient voice carrying deep, unmistakable pride. "You proved, decisively and before the entire watching world, exactly what this household has always been capable of. I do not believe that lesson will soon be forgotten, by allies or enemies alike." The angelic contingent that had arrived alongside Rias's forces began the careful, respectful work of assisting with the wounded, their presence alongside devil and yokai healers alike a striking, almost unbelievable sight given the centuries of mutual suspicion that had defined relations between their factions. One of the angelic commanders, a tall, solemn woman bearing the insignia of Heaven's Moderate Council, approached Issei once the immediate aftermath had settled into something calmer. "I did not expect, when word first reached us of Kokabile's intentions, that we would find ourselves fighting alongside devils and yokai so readily," she admitted. "I confess this experience has given me a great deal to report back to my own superiors, considerably more than the simple containment of a rogue element within Grigori's ranks." Issei extended his hand in grateful greeting. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know that couldn't have been an easy decision, given everything standing between our different worlds historically." The commander studied him for a long moment before accepting the gesture. "Perhaps it is time some of that history finally began to change," she said. "What I witnessed here today suggests it already has, more than most within Heaven's own halls currently realize." Chapter 7. The days following Kokabile's retreat unfolded with the same careful, deliberate energy the household had brought to every previous aftermath, tending to the wounded among their coalition's combined forces, assessing the battlefield's scattered damage, and beginning the delicate diplomatic work of ensuring the confrontation's resolution held firm rather than merely delaying a second attempt. Word arrived within the week that Grigori's moderate leadership, spurred by the scale of Kokabil's failed assault and the damning testimony of witnesses like Rainier who had risked everything to warn against it, had moved swiftly to formally strip him of his remaining authority within their ranks, declaring his actions an unsanctioned act of aggression that did not represent Grigori's official position toward the fragile peace maintained between the supernatural world's various factions. Rainier delivered the news personally, her expression carrying a complicated mixture of relief and lingering exhaustion as she settled into the household's main room for what had become a familiar, welcome routine over the preceding weeks. Grigori's leadership has publicly condemned the attack, she said. Kokabil remains at large, but without his previous backing, his ability to gather meaningful support for any future attempt has been severely, probably permanently, weakened. Yasaka, listening with quiet, satisfied attention, offered her own careful assessment. That is a significant outcome, she said. Not merely surviving his assault, but seeing his own faction formally repudiate it. That kind of decisive institutional response makes any future attempt considerably less likely to gather the support he would need to mount it seriously. Issei, still carrying the settled, hard-won satisfaction of a threat successfully weathered, turned to Rainier with quiet, genuine gratitude. None of this would have gone the way it did without you, he said. The warning, the diplomatic outreach, standing with us through the actual fight itself. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for any of it. Rainier's expression softened, old guilt and new, hard-won pride visibly mingling behind her careful composure. I think, in a strange way, I needed this as much as Grigori's moderate leadership needed the wake-up call Kokabil's failure provided, she admitted. I spent 2 years trying to prove to myself that I could be someone different from who I was that first night. This felt like the moment that finally, actually proved it, rather than just hoping it might be true. Rossweisse, who had grown to genuinely respect the fallen angel's quiet, determined courage across the preceding weeks of preparation and battle, offered her own warm observation. For what it's worth, she said, I do not believe anyone in this household still sees you as merely the person who attacked Issei that first night. We see exactly who you have proven yourself to be since, someone willing to risk everything for the sake of doing what was right. Rainier's composure finally cracked slightly at that, something deeply moved passing behind her careful expression. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than I think I can properly express. Kuroka, never one to let a moment grow too solemn for too long, offered her own easy, welcoming observation. You know, she said, you're basically part of this whole alliance now, whether you meant to be or not. Grigori's moderates, the underworld, heaven's own factions, all of it kind of orbits around Kyoto these days. Might as well make it official and just visit more often. Rainier laughed, soft and genuine, some of the old, careful tension finally easing from her shoulders. I think, she said, I might actually like that. Yasaka, who had been quietly observing the warm exchange, offered her own formal, welcoming acknowledgement. You would be welcome to visit as often as you wish, she said. This household has always measured its members by the choices they make rather than the circumstances of their arrival. You have made your choice clearly, Rainier, not once but twice now, at considerable personal risk both times. That is not something we take lightly. Rossweisse, considering the wider implications of the alliance now solidifying around them, offered a thoughtful addition. It occurs to me, she said, that this household now maintains genuine, working relationships with representatives of every major faction in the supernatural world, the underworld, the yokai territories, the Norse pantheon, and now, cautiously but genuinely, elements of both heaven and Grigori itself. I do not believe any other single territory can claim quite so broad a network of trust. That was never the goal, exactly, Issei said, though he felt the weight of the accomplishment settle warmly into his chest regardless. But I think it makes sense, looking back. We never tried to build power by taking it from anyone else. We just kept trying to do right by whoever showed up needing help. I guess that adds up to something like this, eventually. It adds up to considerably more than that, Yasaka said warmly. It adds up to precisely the kind of foundation that ensures Kyoto will remain untouchable, not through fear of retaliation, but because too many worlds now have genuine reason to want to see it continue to flourish. Chapter 8. In the weeks that followed Kokobil's decisive defeat, word of the battle spread through every corner of the supernatural world with a speed that even the household's growing reputation had not quite prepared them for, carried not merely by careful diplomatic channels, but by the sheer, undeniable scale of what had actually occurred, a coalition spanning devils, yokai, and moderate factions of heaven itself, united against a threat that had once seemed capable of reigniting old wars long thought settled. Rias, visiting Kyoto once the immediate aftermath had finally settled into something calmer, delivered the fuller picture of how the wider world had received the news. The great Satans have taken notice, she said, settling into the familiar warmth of the household's main room with evident satisfaction. Not merely of Kokobil's defeat, but of the coalition itself, proof that genuine cooperation between factions that have spent centuries eyeing each other with suspicion is not merely possible, but effective. There is serious discussion now of formalizing similar cooperative structures for future threats, using what happened here as the founding model. Yasaka, listening with quiet, thoughtful pride, considered the implications carefully. That would be a remarkable legacy, she said, for a threat that began as an attack meant to prove the old ways of suspicion and division still held merit. If Kokobil's failure instead becomes the foundation for lasting cooperation between our worlds, there is a certain justice in that outcome I find deeply satisfying. Issei, listening to the conversation with the same quiet satisfaction that had carried him through every trial the household had faced together, found his thoughts drifting toward how thoroughly his understanding of strength itself had transformed since that very first desperate night 3 years before. I used to think being strong meant being able to handle things on your own, he said. I don't think that anymore. I think the strongest thing we did through all of this wasn't anything I did in that fight. It was building enough trust, with enough different people, that when the moment actually came, we weren't facing it alone. Rossweisse, seated nearby with the same settled, contented ease she had carried since her own trial years before, nodded in thoughtful agreement. That has been the truest lesson of every challenge this household has faced, she said. Strength alone repels a single attack. Trust, built patiently across years, builds something considerably harder to break, an entire network of people who choose, freely, to stand together when it matters most. Kuroka, curled comfortably nearby with her usual easy warmth, added her own grateful observation. And honestly, she said, I don't think any of that trust happens by accident. It happens because you actually keep choosing to build it, every single day, even when nothing dramatic is happening to test it. That's the part people forget, I think. The big battles are just what happens after years of doing the quiet work right. Drake, quiet through much of the reflective conversation, finally spoke, his ancient voice carrying the same deep, settled satisfaction that had followed every trial the household had faced and overcome together. I have watched 1,000 years of hosts build many things, partner, the dragon said. Empires, alliances, legacies of every conceivable kind. I do not believe I have ever watched one built quite so deliberately on trust freely given and freely returned. Whatever the wider world chooses to call what happened here, I suspect historians will look back on this confrontation as the moment cooperation finally proved itself stronger than suspicion, across every faction watching closely enough to learn the lesson properly. The household settled into comfortable, grateful quiet after that, the weight of the recent battle finally easing into something closer to settled, hard-won peace, each of them carrying, in their own way, the accumulated understanding of exactly what 3 years of patient, honest choices had ultimately proven capable of achieving. Rias, before departing to attend to her own house's affairs, paused at the threshold for one final, thoughtful observation. I want you to know, she said, addressing Issei directly, that I have watched a great many alliances form across my time within the underworld's careful political structures. Most of them are built on mutual benefit alone, useful while convenient, and easily discarded once that convenience fades. What you have built here is something else entirely. I do not believe I fully understood the difference until I watched this coalition hold together under genuine pressure. Issei considered her words with quiet, grateful attention. I think that's because nobody here was ever asked to pretend the alliance mattered more than the people in it, he said. We build trust first, and let the strategy follow from that, instead of the other way around. Rias smiled, something genuinely warm and admiring in her expression. That, she said, may be the simplest and truest explanation I have heard yet for why Kyoto continues to succeed where so many other territories, considerably older and more established, have failed. I am grateful, more than I think I have properly expressed, to call this household my ally. As she departed into the gathering evening, Issei felt the same quiet, steady gratitude settle further into his chest, the accumulated weight of 3 years of alliances built not through calculation, but through genuine, patient care. That evening, once the household had finally settled into quiet, well-earned rest, Issei found himself once more reflecting on the strange, improbable distance he had traveled since that very first desperate night. He thought of Rainier, once his would-be killer, now a trusted ally who had risked everything to warn him of exactly this danger. He thought of the angelic commander's careful, thoughtful words, evidence that even centuries of mutual suspicion could begin, slowly and deliberately, to shift. Drake, sensing the direction of his thoughts, offered a final, quiet observation before the night fully settled into rest. You have done something today that few in all of history have managed, partner, the dragon said. You have shown 3 mutually suspicious worlds that cooperation serves them all better than conflict ever could. That lesson, once learned this thoroughly, tends not to be forgotten easily. I just hope it holds, Issei admitted. Peace like this feels fragile sometimes, even when we've just proven how strong it can be. All worthwhile things are fragile, in their way, Drake said. That is precisely why they are worth protecting so carefully. I do not believe you have ever once failed to understand that, partner, not since the very first night I felt you reach for something worth surviving for. Chapter 9. Yasaka proposed a celebration once the coalition's combined forces had finally departed and Kyoto had settled fully back into its familiar, peaceful rhythms, a gathering considerably larger than any the household had hosted before, drawing together representatives from every faction that had stood alongside them against Kokabile's failed assault. This deserves more than a quiet evening among ourselves, she explained, already deep in preparations for what promised to be the largest celebration the household had ever organized. We have just witnessed the birth of genuine cooperation between worlds that have distrusted one another for centuries. That deserves to be honored properly, and witnessed by everyone who helped make it possible. The celebration, when it finally arrived, filled the garden and spilled well beyond it, lanterns strung not merely through the familiar cherry trees but across the wider grounds Yasaka had opened for the occasion, representatives from the underworld's great houses mingling easily with yokai commanders and, remarkably, several cautious but genuinely warm delegates from heaven's moderate factions. A sight that would have seemed impossible only weeks before. Rias found Issei near the edge of the gathering, watching the diverse, unlikely crowd with quiet, satisfied wonder. You built something extraordinary here, she said. Not merely tonight, but across everything that led to it. I do not believe there has been a gathering quite like this one in living memory. Devils, yokai, and angels sharing a celebration rather than eyeing one another across a battlefield. I didn't build it alone, Issei said, the same honest acknowledgement he had offered at every previous milestone the household had celebrated together. Every single person who chose to trust us, chose to show up when it actually mattered, they built this every bit as much as I did. Rainier, standing nearby in quiet, still slightly uncertain conversation with several of her former Grigori colleagues, caught Issei's eye across the gathering and offered a small, grateful smile before returning to her conversation, visibly more at ease among this unlikely crowd than she had been in longer than she could probably remember. Kuroka appeared at Issei's side with her usual easy warmth, watching the celebration with open, delighted satisfaction. Never thought I'd see devils and angels actually laughing together at the same party, she said. Feels like something out of an old story nobody actually believed could really happen. Maybe that's exactly why it matters so much that it did, Rossweisse said, joining them with her own quiet, contented smile. Old stories persist because people need to believe something better is possible. Tonight, I think, proves that belief was never merely wishful thinking. Yasaka moved through the gathering with the same warm, ancient grace she brought to every occasion, pausing beside the 4 of them with quiet, evident pride radiating from her entire bearing. 3 years ago, she said, I found a dying boy beside a fountain and wondered what kind of future such an unlikely beginning might hold. I do not believe, even in my wildest imagining that evening, that I could have predicted anything quite this remarkable. Issei looked around at the celebration filling the garden, at old enemies sharing easy laughter, at a household built from nothing but honest, freely chosen trust now standing at the center of something the wider supernatural world had genuinely never seen before, and felt the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every single trial since that very first desperate night settle, deeper now than ever, into his chest. Neither did I, he admitted softly. But I'm awfully glad it turned out this way. As the night deepened and the celebration continued warmly around them, a small group of children, sons and daughters of several visiting yokai commanders, approached Issei with wide-eyed, curious excitement, clearly having worked up the courage after watching him from a cautious distance for much of the evening. Is it true, one of them finally asked, that you fought the fallen angel lord with your bare hands? Issei laughed, kneeling down to their level with the same easy warmth he brought to everyone who crossed his path. Not quite bare hands, he said, holding up his gauntlet arm for them to see. But close enough. It wasn't really about fighting alone, though. Everyone here tonight helped make sure that battle turned out the way it did. The children peppered him with further eager questions, about Drake, about the ancient shrine, about Vala and the Western Pass, and Issei found himself settling into the comfortable, familiar rhythm of storytelling, watching their wide, delighted eyes as he recounted, with careful modesty, the journey that had brought the household to this remarkable evening. Yasaka, watching the scene from a short distance away with Rossweisse and Kuroka, allowed herself a soft, contented smile. He will make a fine legend for the next generation to grow up hearing about, she observed. Not as some distant, untouchable figure of raw power, but as someone who remained, through everything, remarkably himself. That's exactly why it works, Rossweisse said quietly. Legends built on distance eventually crumble. Legends built on genuine character tend to endure considerably longer. Kuroka, watching the children finally scamper off toward their own families with delighted, chattering excitement, nudged Rossweisse's shoulder affectionately. Bet you never expected to end up part of somebody's bedtime story. Back when you were still stuck doing ceremonial duty for the Pantheon, she said. Rossweisse laughed softly, the sound carrying easy warmth across the quieting garden. No, she admitted. I certainly did not. I find I do not mind it in the slightest, though. It is, I think, a considerably better fate than the one I once expected for myself. They stood together a while longer, watching the celebration wind gently down around them, grateful for exactly the kind of ordinary, hard-won joy that 3 remarkable years of honest choices had finally, fully earned. Chapter 10. Late that night, once the great celebration had finally wound down and the last of the visiting delegates had departed for their respective territories, Issei found himself alone in the bamboo grove where everything had first begun, standing in the same mossy clearing Yasaka had led him to on his very first day in Kyoto, 3 full years now stretching behind him like the accumulated rings of some patient, ancient tree. 3 years, Drake observed, his ancient voice carrying the same warm, settled satisfaction that had followed every trial the household had faced and overcome together. I confess, partner, that even after 1,000 years of hosts, I find myself continually surprised by exactly how much you have built in so relatively short a span of time. I don't think I ever set out to build any of it, Issei admitted, watching the moonlight filter down through the swaying bamboo exactly as it had on that very first, uncertain morning. I just kept trying to do the next right thing, every single day, and somehow all those days added up into something I never could have planned for on my own. That is, I believe, precisely how the truest kind of legacy is always built, Drake said. Not through grand ambition alone, but through patient, honest accumulation, one choice at a time, until one day you look back and find an entire world has grown up around the person you quietly chose to become. Issei sat a while longer in the quiet grove, feeling the deepened ley-line current hum patient and steady beneath him, carrying within it now the accumulated weight of every trial the household had faced and overcome together. The Western Pass, the ancient shrine, Rossweisse's hard-won freedom, Kuroka's reunion with her sister, and now, A coalition strong enough to turn back even an ancient fallen angel's attempt to reignite old wars long thought settled. He returned to the house as the night deepened fully, finding Yasaka, Kuroka, and Rossweisse gathered in the quiet aftermath of the celebration, exhausted but contentedly so. The warm glow of the evening's success still settled comfortably over all of them. Kuroka looked up first, patting the cushion beside her with easy, familiar affection. "There you are," she said. "Was starting to think you'd wandered off to go brood dramatically under the stars again." "Just reflecting," Issei said, settling in among them with the same easy, grateful warmth that had become simply part of who he was in their company. 3 years, if you can believe it. Feels like both no time at all and an entire lifetime, somehow, all at once. Rossweisse, seated nearby with her usual settled, contented ease, nodded slowly in thoughtful agreement. "I have lived considerably longer than 3 years," she said. "And yet I do not believe any equivalent span of my own long life has held quite so much genuine transformation as these past 3 have. I am endlessly grateful to have spent them here, with all of you." Yasaka, watching over the 3 of them with the same warm, ancient patience she had carried since that very first night beside the fountain, allowed herself a rare, deeply contented smile. "Then let us not spend tonight merely reflecting on what has already been built," she said. "Let us also look forward, together, to whatever the years still ahead have waiting for us. I do not believe, watching everything this household has already overcome, that there exists a trial we cannot face, provided we continue facing it exactly as we always have." Together, Issei said the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every single trial since that very first desperate night settling, deeper now than ever, into his chest. Together, Kuroka and Rossweisse echoed warmly, and as the last of the evening's lanterns burned low around them, the household settled into the same comfortable, hard-won peace that had become, across 3 remarkable years, simply what it meant to call Kyoto home. Before finally retiring for the night, Issei stepped out once more onto the porch, looking out over the quiet, moonlit city that had become, so improbably, the truest home he had ever known. He thought of the frightened boy who had first woken in this house 3 years before, uncertain of everything except the strange, steady warmth of a fox goddess's hand extended toward him in the dark. He thought of every trial since, the Western Pass, the ancient shrine, Vala's respectful rivalry, Rossweisse's hard-won freedom, Kuroka's tearful reunion, and now, a coalition strong enough to turn back an ancient fallen angel's ambition entirely. Drake, quiet and content within him, offered one final observation before the night finally settled fully into rest. "Whatever comes next, partner," the dragon said, "I do not believe there exists a trial this household cannot face, provided you continue meeting it exactly as you have every single time before, together, honestly, and without ever losing sight of why any of this was worth building in the first place." "I don't plan on losing sight of that," Issei said quietly, watching the moonlight settle silver and peaceful over Kyoto's ancient rooftops. "Not now, not ever." He remained a while longer on the porch, breathing in the cool night air, before finally turning back toward the warm, familiar light of home, carrying with him the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every single day of the past 3 remarkable years, and would, he understood with total and complete conviction, carry him through every day still waiting ahead. Act 8. Chapter 1. Autumn arrived in Kyoto for the 4th time since Issei's first desperate night beside the fountain, the bamboo groves shifting once more into their familiar gold, and with the season's turn came a challenge unlike any the household had yet faced, one that arrived not from beyond Kyoto's borders, but from within the very heart of the yokai world Yasaka had ruled for centuries. It began with the arrival of a formal delegation, 3 elder kitsune bearing the ancient markings of the Council of 9 Tails, a body of yokai elders whose authority predated even Yasaka's own long reign, rarely convened except for matters the old traditions considered most serious. Yasaka received them with careful, formal courtesy, though Issei could see, in the subtle tension along her shoulders, that their arrival troubled her more deeply than she wished to show. Lady Yasaka, the eldest of the 3, said, her voice carrying the particular, measured weight of someone accustomed to speaking with the full authority of ancient tradition behind her. "The council has convened to address a matter of growing concern among the old families." Your territory has become a haven not merely for yokai in need, but for humans, devils, and now fallen angels as well. Some among the council believe you have strayed too far from the sacred duty entrusted to the nine-tailed fox, diluting our traditions in pursuit of alliances that serve outsiders more than they serve our own kind. Yasaka's expression remained carefully composed, though Issei, watching closely, could see the old, complicated weight of centuries of tradition pressing against her. I have ruled this territory for longer than any of you have walked this earth, she said evenly. Every choice I have made has been made with Kyoto's true interests at heart, interests that have only grown stronger through the alliances you now question. The eldest elder's expression remained unmoved. Strength is not the only measure by which the council judges a ruler's fidelity to tradition, she said. There are those among us who believe your leadership has drifted from the sacred purpose our kind was meant to serve, protecting yokai first, and only extending our hand to others when it costs us nothing to do so. Your current household, however admirable its individual members may be, represents exactly the kind of departure some among the council find impossible to overlook any longer. Issei felt something protective and fierce rise in his chest, the same instinct that had carried him through every previous trial the household had faced together. With respect, he said, stepping forward, this household has done more good for yokai and non-yokai alike than any policy of strict tradition ever could. Kuroka is yokai. She was hunted and abandoned by the very traditions you're describing before Yasaka gave her a home. The elder's gaze shifted toward him, studying him with careful, unreadable scrutiny. You are precisely the departure I speak of, she said, not unkindly, but with unmistakable firmness. A human, however powerful, standing at the center of yokai governance, shaping decisions that were once the sacred province of the nine-tailed fox and her chosen council alone. I do not say this to insult you, Sekiryurai. I say it because the council believes this pattern, however well-intentioned, represents a genuine risk to what makes yokai tradition worth preserving at all. Yasaka's composure finally cracked, just slightly, old grief and old conviction both flickering behind her ancient amber eyes. I have preserved this territory's traditions for centuries, she said, her voice carrying a rare, raw edge. I have also watched those same traditions, applied too rigidly, cost the lives of yokai who needed help traditions alone could not provide. I will not apologize for choosing to save lives the old ways would have abandoned. The elder studied her for a long, weighing moment before delivering the council's true purpose in coming. Then the council formally challenges your continued leadership, she said. A trial, by the old rites, to determine whether your path remains worthy of the nine-tailed fox's mantle, or whether that mantle should pass to someone more committed to tradition's original purpose. You have 1 month to prepare, Lady Yasaka. The council will not delay this matter further. As the 3 elders departed, their formal procession moving with unhurried, deliberate ceremony back toward the tree line, Rossweisse stepped closer to Yasaka's side, her expression carrying careful, thoughtful concern. This is no small thing, she observed quietly. A formal challenge to the nine-tailed fox's mantle. I do not believe such a thing has occurred in generations, has it? Not in my lifetime, Yasaka admitted, her composure finally allowing a measure of genuine worry to surface now that the delegation had fully departed. The council does not invoke the old rites lightly. That they have chosen to do so now, over the choices I have made regarding this household specifically, tells me the reservations I sensed among certain elder families run considerably deeper than I had realized. Kuroka, still visibly bristling with protective anger at the delegation's implications, paced a short distance away before turning back to the group. This is my fault, isn't it? She said, old guilt creeping into her voice. If you'd never taken me in, never given me a place here, none of this would be happening. Yasaka moved to her immediately, resting a firm, reassuring hand against her shoulder. Do not carry that guilt, she said firmly. I chose you, Kuroka, exactly as I chose every member of this household, with full understanding of what that choice might eventually cost me. I do not regret it now, and I will not regret it regardless of how this trial concludes. Do not let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Chapter 2. The council's delegation departed as formally as they had arrived, leaving behind a weight that settled heavily over the household long after the last of their footsteps had faded beyond the garden gate. Yasaka remained standing at the threshold for a long moment, her usual composed grace visibly strained, before finally turning back toward the house with a tired, careful sigh. "I did not expect this," she admitted, settling into the main room where the rest of the household had already gathered, concern evident on every face. "I knew some among the older families harbored quiet reservations about the choices I have made these past years. I did not expect those reservations to escalate into a formal challenge for my mantle." Rossweisse, her careful, analytical mind already turning over the implications, spoke first. "What exactly does this trial entail?" she asked. "And what happens if you lose it?" Yasaka's expression carried old, complicated weight as she considered the question. "The old rites are rarely invoked," she said. "They typically involve a series of trials, tests of wisdom, strength, and judgment, evaluated before the full council and witnessed by yokai from across every territory who wish to observe. Should I lose, the mantle of nine-tailed fox would pass to whoever the council deems more worthy, likely one of the more traditional elders who has long argued for a return to stricter, more insular yokai governance. Kyoto, as we have built it, would very likely cease to exist in anything resembling its current form." Kuroka, visibly alarmed by the stakes now laid bare, leaned forward with fierce, protective concern. "That can happen," she said. "Everything you've built here, everyone you've helped, all of that would just get undone because some old council doesn't like that you help people who weren't yokai." "I understand your concern," Yasaka said gently. "But I want you to understand something as well. This is not merely a political dispute I can resolve through clever argument alone. The old rites carry genuine spiritual weight within yokai tradition. If I wish to retain my place, I must actually demonstrate, before witnesses steeped in that same tradition, that the path I have chosen honors what it means to be nine-tailed fox, rather than abandoning it." Issei, listening with quiet, determined attention, felt the same protective resolve that had carried him through every previous trial settle deep into his chest. "Then tell us what that actually looks like," he said. "Whatever this trial requires, we're not going to just stand back and hope you manage it alone. That's never been how we've done anything here." Yasaka's expression softened at that, old exhaustion giving way, if only briefly, to something warmer and more grateful. "I appreciate that more than I can easily express," she said. "But I want you to understand something else as well, before we go further. This challenge exists, in part, because of choices I made regarding all of you specifically. Opening my territory to you, Kuroka, to you, Rossweisse, and most significantly, elevating a human Sekiryutai to a position of genuine authority within yokai governance. I do not regret a single one of those choices. But I want you to know clearly that whatever difficulty this trial brings, it exists because I chose you, deliberately and without hesitation, over the narrower path some of my own kind believed I should have taken instead." The room fell into a long, weighted silence, the household absorbing the full, personal significance of what Yasaka had just shared. Rossweisse finally spoke, her voice carrying quiet, unwavering conviction. "Then we will make certain that choice is proven right," she said. "Whatever this trial requires of you, we intend to help you meet it, exactly as you have helped each of us meet every trial that has tested this household before." Kuroka, who had remained quiet through much of the heavier conversation, finally spoke, her voice carrying unusual gravity for someone typically so quick with easy humor. "I want you to know something too," she said, looking directly at Yasaka. "You didn't just choose me because it was the right thing to do in some abstract sense. You chose me when I had nothing to offer you, no strength, no standing, nothing but a warren hanging over my head and a sister I couldn't even see. If that's the kind of choice this council thinks is worth punishing you for, then they don't understand what they're actually judging at all." Yasaka's composed expression softened considerably at Kuroka's words, old exhaustion easing into something warmer and more grateful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not think I have properly told any of you how much your presence in this household means to me, beyond simply the political complications it has now brought. You have each given me as much as I have ever given you, perhaps more." Issei, feeling the weight of the moment settle into quiet, determined resolve, spoke once more before the household finally began the practical work of preparation. Then let's make sure the council understands that too, he said. Not just that your choices have been strategically sound, but that they've built something genuinely good. I think that's the argument that actually matters most here. Chapter 3. That evening, once the initial shock of the council's challenge had settled into determined, focused planning, Issei found Yasaka alone in the garden, standing beneath the same cherry tree where so much of the household's history had unfolded, her expression carrying a distant, contemplative weight he had rarely seen from her. Can I ask you something? He said, settling nearby. Always, she said, though her voice carried a tiredness that told him the question, whatever it was, would not be an easy one to answer. Why did you start doing this? He asked. Opening your territory to outsiders, I mean. Before I ever showed up here. Was there something specific that made you choose that path, even knowing it might cost you exactly what's happening now? Yasaka was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes drifting toward the darkening sky. There was, she admitted finally. Centuries ago, before you were born, before even your grandparents were born, I turned away a young yokai who came to my border seeking shelter. She was only part yokai, her human blood considered a stain by the traditions I upheld without question at the time. I followed the old ways precisely as they were meant to be followed, and I turned her away, believing I was protecting something sacred by doing so. Issei waited, sensing there was more, and more difficult, still to come. She died, Yasaka said quietly, 3 days later, hunted by exorcists who found her exactly where I had sent her, alone and undefended. I learned of her death only afterward, when it was already far too late to change anything. I have carried that choice for centuries, Issei. It is the reason I began, slowly and carefully at first, to question whether the old ways, applied without exception, truly serve the purpose they claim to serve. Issei felt the weight of her confession settle heavily into his own chest, understanding now, more fully than ever, exactly what had shaped the woman who had once knelt beside a dying boy in a park and chosen, without hesitation, to save him. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. That's an impossible thing to carry. It is, she agreed. But it is also, I have come to believe, the reason I was able to recognize you for what you truly were, that very first night. I had already spent centuries learning, slowly and painfully, that rigid tradition without genuine compassion behind it can cost lives it was meant to protect. I was not going to make that same mistake twice. Issei considered her words carefully, feeling something fierce and protective settle even deeper into his resolve. Then this trial isn't really about whether you've strayed from tradition, he said. It's about whether the council can finally understand what you already learned the hard way, centuries before any of us arrived. Yasaka's expression carried quiet, grateful surprise at his understanding. Precisely, she said. Though I confess, convincing a council steeped in centuries of unquestioned tradition will prove considerably harder than simply stating the lesson plainly. Some truths must be demonstrated, not merely spoken, before those unwilling to hear them can finally understand. Then let's show them, Issei said, with the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every trial since that very first desperate night. Whatever this trial actually requires, I believe we can prove exactly what you're describing, clearly enough that even the most stubborn tradition can't ignore it any longer. Yasaka studied him for a long moment, something warm and grateful passing behind her ancient eyes. You have a way of making difficult things feel possible, she observed. I have relied on that quality of yours more times than I think you realize, across these past 4 years. I learned it from you honestly, Issei said. That first night, when everything felt impossible, you were the one who made it feel like maybe it wasn't. I've just been trying to pass that forward ever since. Yasaka's composed expression softened further, old grief finally beginning to ease under the weight of present gratitude. Perhaps, she said quietly, that is precisely why this household has become what it has. Not because any one of us carries all the answers alone, but because we keep passing forward whatever strength we find, to whoever needs it next. They remained beneath the cherry tree a while longer, the autumn evening settling cool and quiet around them, until the practical work of the coming month finally called them both back toward the house, and the careful, determined preparation that would carry Yasaka through whatever trial still waited ahead. Chapter 4. The following weeks unfolded with the same determined, focused energy the household had brought to every previous challenge, though this trial, unlike any before it, required a different kind of preparation entirely, one built less around martial strength and more around the careful, deliberate work of demonstrating exactly what Yasaka's chosen path had actually accomplished. The trials themselves, Yasaka explained, once she had gathered the full details from a formal council messenger, unfold across 3 distinct tests. The first, a trial of wisdom, requires me to answer the council's questions regarding my governance before their full assembly. The second, a trial of strength, requires a demonstration of my continued capability to protect this territory, traditionally measured through single combat against a council-appointed challenger. The third, and most significant, a trial of judgment, allows the council to examine the actual state of the territory I govern, its people, its alliances, and its overall well-being, weighed against the traditions I am accused of straying from. Rossweisse, her analytical mind already mapping the practical dimensions of each trial, offered her careful assessment. The first and third trials, she said, are ones we can help prepare for directly, gathering testimony, documenting the genuine benefit Kyoto's alliances have provided, presenting a clear, honest account of everything this household has built. The second trial, however, concerns me considerably more. Do you know who the council might appoint as your combat challenger? Yasaka's expression carried careful, measured concern. Likely one of the more traditional elders' own chosen champions, she said. Possibly even one of the elders themselves, if they wished to make a particularly forceful statement. I have not fought a serious combat trial in centuries. I do not doubt my own strength, precisely, but I confess the prospect carries weight I have not needed to consider in a very long time. Issei, listening with quiet, protective attention, felt an idea beginning to form, cautious but genuine. What if I fought in your place, he offered. If the old rites allow for a champion to stand for the one being challenged, that would let you focus on the wisdom and judgment trials, where your own voice matters most, while I handle whatever the council's combat challenge actually requires. Yasaka considered the suggestion carefully, weighing something behind her thoughtful expression. The old rites do allow for a chosen champion, she said slowly. Though I confess, allowing you to stand in that role would itself become part of what the council examines. A human security fighting on behalf of the nine-tailed fox, precisely the kind of departure from tradition they are already troubled by. Then let's make it work in our favor instead of against us, Kuroka said, her sharp mind already turning the idea over with evident enthusiasm. If Issei fights for Yasaka and wins, that's not just proof she's still strong enough to hold her position. That's living proof that the alliances she's built actually make her stronger, not weaker, exactly like the council's worried they might be undermining tradition. Rossweisse nodded slowly, her strategic instincts clearly warming to the approach. That is precisely the kind of demonstration this trial requires, she said. Not merely surviving the council's scrutiny, but transforming their own test into evidence for exactly the argument we need to make. I believe this could work remarkably well, provided Issei's performance in the combat trial proves as decisive as everything he has shown us across the past 4 years. Yasaka studied Issei for a long, searching moment, old caution warring visibly with growing, hopeful conviction. You would do this, she asked quietly. Stand as my champion, before the full council, knowing exactly how much scrutiny that choice would bring upon both of us. Without hesitation, Issei said simply. You've stood beside every single one of us through every trial we've faced. I'm not about to let you face this one without the same thing in return. Over the following weeks, the household settled into focused, determined preparation, Rossweisse drilling Issei through increasingly demanding sparring sessions designed to sharpen every aspect of his control, while Kuroka and several of Yasaka's own trusted commanders worked to gather testimony and documentation for the trial of judgment still to come. Yasaka herself spent long hours preparing for the trial of wisdom, reviewing centuries of governance decisions, old records of yokai who had been helped by her policies, careful accounts of exactly how the territory's alliances had strengthened rather than weakened the people she governed. One evening, as the preparations stretched late into the night, Issei found Yasaka poring over an old, weathered scroll by lamplight, her expression distant and thoughtful. What's that? He asked, settling beside her. Records, she said, from the years immediately following the choice that changed everything for me. Every yokai I sheltered afterward, every outcome, good and difficult alike. I kept them, I think, partly as accountability to myself, and partly, perhaps, in case a day like this one ever arrived and I needed proof that my chosen path had actually helped rather than harmed. Issei studied the careful, meticulous records, decades of documented compassion laid out in patient, deliberate detail. This is exactly the kind of evidence the Council needs to see, he said. Not just us, not just what we've built in these past 4 years, but the entire pattern, going back centuries. Yasaka nodded slowly, something resolved settling into her expression. Then let us make certain they see it clearly, she said. Whatever else this trial demands, I do not intend to let centuries of careful, honest work go unacknowledged simply because a few among the Council prefer comfortable tradition over difficult truth. Rossweisse, reviewing a portion of the same records the following morning, paused over one particular entry, her expression thoughtful. This one mentions a young kitsune family you sheltered during a famine nearly 2 centuries ago, she observed. The record notes they went on to found an entire settlement of their own, one that still exists today. Did you know that? I did, Yasaka said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. I have followed their descendants' progress over the years, quietly, from a respectful distance. It has been one of the great, ongoing joys of my long life, watching what became possible for them once given the chance to simply survive long enough to build something of their own. That is precisely the kind of testimony the Council needs to hear, Rossweisse said firmly. Not abstract argument about tradition and adaptation, but concrete, undeniable proof of lives saved, futures made possible, generations who exist today because you chose compassion over rigid rule following. I believe, presented properly, this record alone could sway even skeptical minds. Yasaka considered the suggestion carefully before nodding. Then let us gather every such record we can find, she said, and present them not merely as evidence, but as the true legacy of everything I have built, both before this household arrived, and everything we have built together since. Chapter 5. The Council convened 1 month later, exactly as promised, within an ancient stone amphitheater deep in the mountains north of Kyoto, a site Yasaka explained had hosted every significant yokai gathering for over 1,000 years, its weathered stone tiers filled now with elders and witnesses from territories spanning the length of the old country, all gathered to observe the rare, serious spectacle of a formal leadership challenge. The trial of wisdom began at dawn, Yasaka standing alone at the amphitheater's center while the full council, 9 elder kitsune representing the oldest and most respected yokai families, arrayed themselves in careful formation before her. Issei, Kuroka, and Rossweisse watched from the gathered crowd, unable to intervene directly in this portion of the trial, though their presence alone offered Yasaka the same quiet, steady support they had provided through every previous challenge. You are accused, the eldest council member began, her voice carrying easily across the hushed amphitheater, of governing in a manner that prioritizes outsiders over the yokai you were sworn to protect. Answer plainly. Do you deny this accusation? Yasaka's voice, when she answered, carried the same calm, unshakable authority Issei had come to know across 4 years of trials faced together. I do not deny that I have extended shelter to humans, devils, and fallen angels within my territory, she said. I deny entirely that doing so has come at the expense of the yokai I govern. Every yokai within Kyoto's borders remains protected, respected, and cared for exactly as tradition demands. I have simply chosen not to limit that same protection only to those born of yokai blood. A second council member, an older, sterner figure whose expression carried visible skepticism, pressed further. And what of the sacred boundaries our kind has maintained for centuries, separating our world from those who would exploit it if given the chance? Do you not risk everything our traditions were built to protect, by opening those boundaries so freely? I risked nothing that was not already at risk long before I made these choices, Yasaka said evenly. The old boundaries did not prevent exorcists from hunting yokai who strayed beyond safe territory. They did not prevent devils from exploiting yokai who had nowhere else to turn. What I have built instead is a territory strong enough, and allied broadly enough, that such exploitation has become considerably harder to attempt against anyone sheltered here, yokai and outsider alike. The questioning continued for hours, each council member pressing their own particular concerns, testing Yasaka's reasoning with the same rigorous, unrelenting scrutiny that had defined the old rites for centuries. Issei watched with quiet, fierce pride as she met every challenge with the same calm, considered wisdom that had guided the household through every trial since that very first night beside the fountain, never once wavering, never once retreating into easy or defensive answers, but engaging honestly, even when the questions cut close to old wounds she rarely spoke of. Finally, as the sun climbed high overhead, the eldest council member raised a hand to signal the trial's conclusion. "Your answers have been heard," she said. "The council will weigh them carefully against what remains to be demonstrated in the trials still ahead. You may rest, Lady Yasaka, before tomorrow's trial of strength begins." As Yasaka finally stepped down from the amphitheater's center, visibly exhausted but carrying herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout, Issei moved immediately to her side, offering silent, steady support as they made their way back toward the modest quarters the council had provided for the trial's duration. "You did remarkably well," he said quietly, once they were finally away from the crowd's watchful attention. "I do not know if it was enough," Yasaka admitted, her composure finally allowing a measure of genuine exhaustion to show. "Some among the council have already made their judgment long before today's questioning began. I fear no answer, however honest, will change minds that have already closed themselves to the possibility I might be right. Then tomorrow," Issei said, "we make sure the trial of strength leaves absolutely no room for doubt." Rossweisse and Kuroka joined them a short while later, both carrying the same quiet, determined concern that had settled over the entire household since the trial's difficult opening. "How did it actually go?" Kuroka asked, studying Yasaka's tired but composed expression carefully. "Was it as bad as it looked from where we were sitting?" "It was thorough," Yasaka said carefully. "Which I suppose is precisely what a trial of this significance ought to be." Several among the council pressed quite hard on the question of tradition versus adaptation. I do not believe I fully persuaded the most skeptical among them, but I do believe I gave them something genuine to consider, rather than the easy dismissal they perhaps expected. Rossweisse nodded thoughtfully, already turning her mind toward the trials still ahead. "Then tomorrow's demonstration becomes all the more important," she said. "If today planted seeds of doubt in even the most skeptical minds, a decisive, principled victory tomorrow may be exactly what tips those seeds toward genuine reconsideration rather than dismissal." Yasaka managed a tired, grateful smile at the steady confidence surrounding her. "I am fortunate," she said quietly, "to face this trial with all of you beside me. Whatever tomorrow brings, I do not believe I could ask for better support than what this household has already given me." "You don't have to ask," Kuroka said firmly. "It's already yours. Every single day, no matter what." Yasaka excused herself shortly after to rest ahead of the coming trial, and once she had gone, Issei found himself sitting quietly with Kuroka and Rossweisse in the gathering dark, the weight of the coming days settling differently over each of them. "It's strange," Kuroka admitted, "watching someone as strong as her have to prove herself like this. Makes you realize nobody's ever really past needing people in their corner, no matter how powerful they get." Rossweisse nodded thoughtfully. "That may be the most important lesson this entire trial teaches, regardless of how it concludes," she said. "Strength, wisdom, centuries of accumulated experience, none of it exempts anyone from needing genuine support when it matters most. I suspect that is precisely why Yasaka built this household the way she did in the first place, understanding that truth long before the rest of us arrived to learn it alongside her." Issei looked between them, feeling the same quiet gratitude that had carried him through every trial since that very first desperate night settle warmly into his chest. "Then let's make sure she never has to wonder whether that support is real," he said. "Tomorrow, and every day after." Chapter 6. The trial of strength convened the following morning. The amphitheater stone tiers filled even more densely than the day before, word of the previous day's rigorous questioning having spread quickly among the gathered witnesses, drawing yet more curious observers eager to see how the challenge would ultimately resolve. The eldest council member addressed the crowd formally before the trial began. Lady Yasaka has chosen to exercise her right to a champion, she announced, a ripple of surprised murmurs spreading through the gathered witnesses at the declaration. She has selected Issei Hayadu, the Sekyuryutai known as the Dragon Sage of Kyoto, to stand in her place for this trial of strength. The murmurs sharpened into more pointed whispers, several among the crowd exchanging skeptical, doubtful glances, exactly the reaction the household had anticipated when they first devised the strategy. The council has selected Lord Fenric of the Northern Territories as challenger, the elder continued, gesturing toward a broad-shouldered wolf yokai who stepped forward from among the assembled elders, his expression carrying cold, confident readiness. Lord Fenric has long argued for a return to stricter yokai governance. Let this trial demonstrate clearly whether Lady Yasaka's chosen path holds genuine strength, or merely the appearance of it. Issei stepped forward into the amphitheater's central ring, feeling the weight of hundreds of watchful, skeptical eyes settle upon him, and found, beneath the pressure of the moment, the same quiet, steady resolve that had carried him through every previous trial the household had faced together. Fenric studied him with open, assessing scrutiny, his massive frame radiating raw, untested power. A human champion, Fenric said, his voice carrying deep, rumbling contempt. Lady Yasaka insults this trial by sending someone who cannot even claim yokai blood to defend her position among us. I'm not here to claim anything that isn't already true, Issei said evenly. I'm here because Yasaka trusted me to stand for her, the same way she's trusted every single person in this household, yokai and otherwise, across 4 years of choices that have only ever made this territory stronger. If you want to prove that trust was misplaced, you're welcome to try. Fenric's expression sharpened with genuine anger at the calm confidence in Issei's response, and without further ceremony, he lunged forward, massive claws extending as raw, savage power gathered around his shifting form. Issei met the charge with the same controlled, deliberate calm that had defined every previous confrontation, gold-threaded scale blazing bright along both arms as he caught Fenric's first devastating strike on a raised, braced forearm. The impact shattered stone beneath his feet, but he held, and Fenric's eyes widened with genuine, unwilling surprise at the sheer, controlled strength meeting his own raw fury. The battle that followed unfolded with fierce, escalating intensity, Fenric's savage, overwhelming power meeting Issei's disciplined, deep infusion of senjutsu, dragon fire, and the first flame's ancient gift in exchange after punishing exchange, the amphitheater's gathered witnesses watching in stunned, increasingly reverent silence as the confrontation made unmistakably clear exactly what kind of strength Yasaka's chosen path had actually cultivated. You fight with considerable skill, for a human, Fenric admitted, breathing hard, several minutes into the escalating exchange, genuine respect finally beginning to color his earlier contempt. I'm not fighting alone, Issei said, pressing his advantage with controlled, relentless precision. Everything I've learned, everything that's made me strong enough to stand here at all, came from a household that includes yokai, humans, devils, and now angels, all of us choosing to trust each other freely. That's not weakness, Fenric. That's exactly the kind of strength tradition alone could never have built. With that, Issei released the full, controlled current of everything 4 years of trials had built within him, gold-threaded light erupting outward in a decisive, overwhelming wave that finally, unmistakably brought the confrontation to its conclusion, Fenric driven to one knee, his earlier fury replaced now by genuine, humbled acknowledgement of exactly what he had just witnessed. The amphitheater fell into stunned, reverent silence, hundreds of witnesses absorbing the full weight of what they had just seen, a human champion, standing for a challenged ruler, demonstrating strength that clearly exceeded anything the assembled yokai had expected to witness from someone without a drop of yokai blood in his veins. Several among the council exchanged startled, reconsidering glances, their earlier certainty visibly shaken by the sheer, controlled power on display. Issei extended a hand toward Fenric, helping the massive wolf yokai back to his feet with the same easy, unguarded respect he had shown throughout the entire confrontation. You fought well, he said. I didn't come here trying to humiliate you or prove some point about yokai being weaker than humans. I came here to prove that what Yasaka's built, strength through trust rather than isolation, actually works. I hope that's what you saw today. Fenric studied him for a long moment, old certainty visibly giving way to something more thoughtful and considered. I saw considerably more than I expected to, he admitted. Whatever conclusions the council ultimately reaches, I do not believe I will forget what I witnessed here today. The eldest council member rose from among the assembled elders, her expression carrying careful, measured consideration as she surveyed the battlefield's aftermath. Let the record show, she announced formally, that Lady Yasaka's champion prevailed decisively, and demonstrated restraint befitting the finest traditions of honorable combat, despite facing an opponent who showed him none of the same courtesy at the outset. This council will weigh that distinction carefully. As the crowd began to disperse, still murmuring among themselves about the remarkable confrontation they had witnessed, Issei allowed himself a moment of quiet, exhausted relief, the accumulated tension of the trial finally beginning to ease from his shoulders. He had proven, decisively and before hundreds of watching witnesses, exactly what he had set out to prove, that the strength Yasaka's chosen path had cultivated was genuine, formidable, and worth every risk the household had taken to demonstrate it. Chapter 7. Fenric remained kneeling for a long, waited moment, the amphitheater's gathered witnesses holding their collective breath as the massive wolf yokai absorbed the full weight of his decisive defeat. When he finally rose, his earlier contempt had transformed entirely into something considerably more thoughtful, his gaze studying Issei with careful, reassessing attention. I have fought many opponents across many years, he said, his deep voice carrying genuine, grudging respect now. I have rarely faced strength paired with such deliberate restraint. You could have ended that confrontation far more decisively than you did. I didn't want to hurt you, Issei said honestly, offering a hand to help him rise. This was never about proving I could beat you. It was about proving what Yasaka's built here actually holds up under real pressure. Fenric accepted the offered hand, studying Issei a moment longer before turning to address the full council directly. I came to this trial believing Lady Yasaka's path represented a genuine weakening of what our traditions were meant to protect, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed amphitheater. I confess, having faced her chosen champion directly, I find that belief considerably harder to maintain. Whatever alliance produced the strength I just witnessed, it is not weakness. I have rarely felt strength this genuine in all my years. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gathered council members, several exchanging startled, reconsidering glances at Fenric's unexpected concession. The eldest council member studied the scene with careful, measured attention before finally speaking. The trial of strength is concluded, she announced. Lady Yasaka's champion has prevailed, decisively and without unnecessary cruelty. The council will weigh this outcome carefully alongside tomorrow's trial of judgment. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with astonished conversation about the confrontation they had just witnessed, Yasaka made her way to Issei's side, her expression carrying a depth of gratitude that went beyond simple relief. You did more than win that trial, she said quietly. You changed minds today, Issei. I watched it happen, watched Fenric's own certainty crack in real time. That is not something raw strength alone could ever have accomplished. I just did what felt right, Issei said. Same as always. Kuroka and Rossweisse joined them a moment later, both radiating fierce, proud satisfaction at the outcome. That was incredible, Kuroka said, practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see Fenric's face when he actually conceded the point? I don't think anyone expected that. Rossweisse, her usual measured composure carrying unmistakable warmth, offered her own quiet assessment. You demonstrated precisely what this trial needed demonstrated, she said. Not merely victory, but victory achieved through exactly the values Yasaka has been accused of abandoning. I do not believe the council can easily dismiss what they witnessed today. Yasaka, watching the three of them with quiet, overwhelming gratitude, felt something in her chest ease for the first time since the council's initial challenge had arrived. Whatever the trial of judgment still holds, she said, I believe, for the first time since this began, that we may actually prevail. That evening, as the household settled into a rare moment of quiet rest before the final trial, Issei found himself unexpectedly approached by one of the younger council members, a cautious, thoughtful kitsune who had remained largely silent throughout the day's proceedings. I wanted to speak with you privately, she said, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. I do not entirely share the concerns some of my colleagues hold regarding Lady Yasaka's leadership. I have watched Kyoto's transformation with considerable interest these past years, and much of what I have seen has impressed me deeply. Issei studied her with careful, curious attention. Why tell me this now, rather than simply voting your conscience when the time comes, he asked. Because I believe the Council's final judgment may prove closer than either side currently expects, she admitted. And because I wanted you to understand that not every traditional voice within our world views change as inherently dangerous. Some of us are simply waiting to see genuine proof before we commit ourselves publicly. What I witnessed today provided a great deal of that proof. Issei felt a flicker of cautious hope at her words. Thank you for telling me, he said. It helps, knowing not everyone's already made up their mind against us. The young council member offered a small, careful smile before departing to rejoin her colleagues. Tomorrow will tell the rest, she said. But I do not believe your efforts here have been wasted, whatever the final outcome proves to be. Chapter 8. The trial of judgment unfolded very differently from the two that had preceded it, the council choosing not to convene at the mountain amphitheater at all, but instead traveling personally to Kyoto itself, insisting on witnessing firsthand the territory whose governance stood in question rather than relying solely on testimony and argument. Yasaka welcomed them with the same careful, formal hospitality she had shown throughout the entire process, though Issei could sense, beneath her composed exterior, a cautious, hopeful anticipation that had not been present when the trials first began. The council spent the full day moving through the territory, observing the training yard where Rossweisse still drilled new arrivals in disciplined combat, the quiet corners of the residential district where yokai and humans alike went about their ordinary lives in easy, unremarkable coexistence, and finally, the household itself, where Kuroka's reunion with her sister had unfolded. Where Rossweisse had found the freedom 2 centuries of service never offered her, where an entire coalition had once gathered to turn back Kokabille's ambitions. The eldest council member, walking alongside Yasaka through the residential district's bustling afternoon activity, finally spoke, her earlier formal reserve softening into something more genuinely curious. I confess, she said, I expected to find evidence of exactly the delusion the council feared, yokai traditions eroded by outside influence, our people's well-being sacrificed for the sake of broader alliances. I do not find that here. What do you find instead? Yasaka asked carefully. The elder considered the question seriously as they continued walking, passing a group of young kitsune children playing alongside a human merchant's own children, their laughter mingling easily in the autumn afternoon air. I find a territory where yokai remain fully yokai, she said slowly, where our traditions continue, honored and practiced, but no longer treated as walls meant to keep the world out. I think, exactly what tradition was always meant to protect in the first place, our people, thriving, safe, and free to choose the shape their own lives take. By evening, as the council gathered one final time in Yasaka's great hall to render their formal judgment, Issei found himself holding his breath alongside the rest of the household, the accumulated weight of the past month's trials finally converging toward this single, decisive moment. The eldest council member rose to deliver the verdict, her voice carrying the full, formal weight of the ancient rights she represented. This council has weighed Lady Yasaka's wisdom, her strength, and the true state of the territory she governs, she said. We find unanimously that her chosen path, however it may depart from the narrowest interpretation of our old traditions, honors the deeper purpose those traditions were always meant to serve, the protection and flourishing of our people. The challenge to her leadership is dismissed. Lady Yasaka retains the mantle of nine-tailed fox, with the council's full and formal endorsement. The great hall erupted into relieved, overwhelming celebration, Kuroka's whoop of pure joy echoing off the ancient rafters as Rossweisse embraced Yasaka with unguarded, grateful warmth. Yasaka herself stood for a long moment, visibly overwhelmed, before finally allowing herself to fully absorb the verdict, centuries of carried doubt, and old grief finally, fully vindicated. I did not know, until this very moment, exactly how much I needed to hear that, she admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion as Issei moved to her side. You earned it, he said simply. Every single day of the past 4 years, You earned exactly this. The eldest council member approached the household directly once the initial celebration had settled enough to allow proper conversation. Her earlier formal reserve softened now into something genuinely warm. I want you to know, she said to Issei specifically, that your performance in the trial of strength weighed heavily in this council's final deliberations. It is not often that tradition is challenged so effectively, and so respectfully, all at once. I believe several among us will carry that lesson forward into how we consider such matters in the future. Issei accepted the acknowledgement with quiet, grateful humility. I just wanted to help prove what I already knew was true, he said. I'm glad it actually made a difference in how the council sees things now. It has, the elder confirmed. And I suspect, watching this territory continue to flourish under Lady Yasaka's guidance, that difference will only continue growing in the years ahead. The council does not often admit when its assumptions have proven mistaken. I believe, in this case, that admission is well and truly earned. As the elder departed to rejoin the rest of the council, Yasaka turned to Issei with quiet, overwhelming gratitude still evident in her expression. Do you understand what you accomplished today? She asked. Not merely winning my trial, but shifting how an entire council of ancient, traditional minds approaches questions of change and adaptation. That ripple will extend far beyond Kyoto's own borders in time. I just wanted to help you keep what you'd built, Issei said honestly. If it does more than that, I'm glad. But that was always the actual goal. Chapter 9. The celebration that followed the council's verdict spread quickly through Kyoto's streets, word of Yasaka's decisive vindication carrying an infectious, overwhelming relief through the entire territory, residents pouring into the streets with the same warm, communal joy that had marked every previous milestone the household had celebrated together. Fenrik himself attended, considerably humbled from the wolf yokai who had entered the combat trial with such cold contempt, seeking out Issei personally amid the celebration's warm case. I wanted to offer a proper apology, he said, his deep voice carrying genuine, unguarded sincerity now. I judged you, and Lady Yasaka's entire path, without truly understanding what I was judging. What I witnessed these past days has changed that considerably. Issei accepted the apology with easy, genuine warmth. I appreciate you saying that, he said. And for what it's worth, I don't think you were wrong to ask hard questions. Tradition matters. I just think Yasaka's proven that it doesn't have to mean what you were afraid it might. Fenrik nodded slowly, something thoughtful passing behind his expression. Perhaps I will visit again sometime, he said, when the circumstances are less fraught. I find myself curious now, rather than merely suspicious. You'd be welcome, Issei said, and meant it. Later, once the celebration had begun to settle into its easy, comfortable late hours, Issei found Yasaka standing alone beneath the same cherry tree where they had spoken so many months before, her expression carrying a peace he had rarely seen from her, old grief finally, fully released. I keep thinking about her, she admitted, when Issei settled beside her. The young yokai I turned away, all those centuries ago. I have carried her memory for so long as a warning, a reminder of exactly what rigid tradition can cost. Tonight, for the first time, I find myself thinking of her differently. Not merely as a warning, but as the reason everything we've built here was ever possible at all. I think she'd be glad, Issei said quietly. Knowing what her memory helped build. Yasaka's eyes glistened faintly in the lantern light, though her composed smile never wavered. I would like to believe that, she said. I think, after tonight I finally do. They stood together beneath the cherry tree a while longer, the celebration's warm laughter carrying gently across the garden behind them, until Kuroka's voice finally called them both back toward the gathering, insisting loudly that the guest of honor could not possibly be allowed to spend her own vindication hiding in the shadows. Duty calls, Yasaka said, echoing, with fond amusement, the same words Rossweisse had once spoken at her own celebration. It does, Issei agreed, offering her his arm. Come on. Let's go celebrate properly. As they rejoined the celebration, Rossweisse found a quiet moment to fall into step beside Issei, her expression carrying warm, thoughtful satisfaction. That was well done, she said. All of it, from the moment you offered to stand as her champion through tonight's celebration. I do not believe Yasaka will forget what you gave her these past weeks. I didn't do it expecting anything back, Issei said. She's given all of us so much since we got here. This felt like the least I could do. Rossweisse studied him for a moment, something fond and admiring in her expression. That has always been your particular gift, she observed. Giving fully, without keeping careful account of what might be owed in return. I have watched it shape everything this household has become, across every trial we have faced together. Kuroka, overhearing the tail end of the conversation as she rejoined them with 3 cups of celebratory drink balanced carefully in her hands, offered her own cheerful addition. Yeah, well, good thing giving fully seems to work out pretty well for all of us, she said, passing the drinks around. Wouldn't want to be part of a household that kept score. Sounds exhausting. The 3 of them shared an easy, warm laugh at that, the celebration continuing warmly around them, the accumulated relief and joy of the past month's difficult trial finally settling into simple, uncomplicated gratitude. Chapter 10. In the weeks that followed the council's verdict, word of Yasaka's vindication rippled outward through yokai territories across the length of the old country, carrying with it a quiet, gradual shift in how many of the more traditional communities viewed the question of alliance and openness that had once seemed so settled and unquestionable. Rias, hearing the full account during one of her regular visits, offered her own warm, admiring assessment. I have watched this household reshape how devils and yokai relate to one another, how fallen angels and moderate factions of heaven cooperate, she said. I did not expect I would also watch it reshape yokai tradition from within. You continue to surprise me, all of you. Issei, listening with the same quiet satisfaction that had carried him through every trial the household had faced, found his thoughts drifting toward the deeper current of change that seemed to ripple outward from every challenge they overcame together. I don't think any of us set out to reshape anything, he said. We just kept trying to do right by the people in front of us. I guess that adds up to something bigger, eventually, whether we're aiming for it or not. Yasaka, settled comfortably among the household in the same warm room where so many of these reflective evenings had unfolded, offered her own thoughtful addition. That is, I believe, the truest measure of lasting change, she said. Not change imposed from above, through decree or conquest, but change that grows naturally from enough small, honest choices, repeated consistently enough that the old patterns simply can no longer hold against them. Rossweisse, seated nearby with her usual settled, contented ease, nodded slowly in agreement. I have watched this household prove that principle now across every challenge we have faced, she said. The Western Pass, the ancient shrine, my own trial with the Norse pantheon, Kuroka's reunion with her sister, Kokobil's failed ambitions, and now this. Each one different, and yet each one built on precisely the same foundation. Kuroka, curled comfortably nearby with the same easy warmth that had become simply part of who she was, offered her own grateful observation. 4 years, she said. Feels like we've built an entire world in that time, honestly. I keep waiting for it to feel like enough, like we can finally just rest and let everything settle. But every time something new comes along, I realize I wouldn't actually trade any of it. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts, maybe. Issei considered her words carefully, feeling the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every single trial since that very first desperate night settle, deeper now than ever, into his chest. I don't think it's supposed to feel like enough, he said. I think that's kind of the point. We just keep building, one honest choice at a time, and trust that whatever comes next, we'll be ready for it together. Drake, quiet through much of the evening's reflection, finally spoke, his ancient voice carrying the same deep, settled satisfaction that had followed every trial the household had faced and overcome together. 4 years, partner, the dragon said. I have carried 1,000 years of hosts, and I do not believe I have ever watched one build quite so much, so quickly, or so honestly. Whatever the years still ahead have waiting for this household, I do not believe there exists a trial you cannot face, provided you continue meeting it exactly as you always have. Together, Issei said the same words that had carried him through every celebration, every trial, every quiet evening of reflection across 4 remarkable years. Together, the household echoed warmly, and as the evening settled into comfortable, familiar quiet around them, Kyoto's ancient ley lines hummed patient and steady beneath the city's old stone streets, carrying forward the accumulated weight of everything 4 years of honest, freely chosen family had built, and everything still, patiently and faithfully, waiting to be built in all the years still to come. Later that night, once the others had finally retired, Yasaka found Issei alone in the training yard, standing quietly beneath a sky full of autumn stars. She settled beside him without a word, content simply to share the comfortable silence for a while before finally speaking. "I have led this territory for centuries," she said. "I have weathered wars, famines, the slow turning of empires rising and falling around us. I do not think, in all that time, I have ever felt as certain of the future as I do tonight." Issei glanced at her, warmth settling into his chest at her words. "What changed?" he asked. "I think," she said slowly, "I finally allowed myself to stop carrying the future alone. For centuries, I believed that being nine-tailed fox meant bearing every burden myself, protecting my people through sheer, solitary strength and careful, guarded wisdom. You, and Kuroka, and Rossweisse, all of you taught me something different. That carrying a burden together does not diminish the strength required to bear it. It multiplies that strength, considerably, beyond what any one of us could manage alone." Issei considered her words carefully, feeling the same quiet, unshakable certainty that had carried him through every trial since that very first desperate night settled deeper into his chest. "I think that's the truest thing this whole household has ever proven," he said. "Not that any one of us is unstoppable alone. That together, we're something the world hasn't really seen before." Yasaka's smile, when it came, carried the full, unguarded warmth of someone finally, completely at peace. "Together," she agreed softly, and they remained beneath the stars a while longer, two friends who had become family, watching over a city that had become, through 4 remarkable years of honest choices, exactly the home neither of them had ever quite dared to imagine finding. Thanks for listening.